Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the
Good morning and welcome to the first Environment Committee meeting of 2026. We are continuing our investigation into heat networks and we have some further expert guests who we're going to put questions to. But before we get to that point, and obviously a Happy New Year to everybody, thank you for joining us today. We've got a few items of standard business before we hear from consumers and representatives from Citizen Advice and Peabody, as well as hearing slightly later on from officials from the Greater London Authority and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And their insights will help us understand the impact of heat networks and the planning considerations involved. Just before we start, can I just remind everybody to put your phones and any other devices onto silent? And can I ask you not to put your phone in front of the microphone when it's turned on? Even if you have silenced, if it's on vibrate, the microphones will still pick that up. And also, if you are going to speak to the microphone, if you can make sure it's in a position so that it does pick up your voice. If you need to move the microphone, please pick it up by the base, not by the gooseneck, as they might break. And we'll just warn the guests that we might have to charge you if you break the microphones. Members of the public are encouraged to follow on social media at London Assembly on a variety of platforms. And if you're using X, please use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Right, I'm going to do the small items of business. Could I ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm whether we've had any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. The second item on the agenda is declarations of interest, and they are on pages 1 to 4 of your agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to note the declarations of interest? Thank you. Does anyone have anything else that they need to declare? Gone. OK, item 3 is the minutes, which are on pages 5 to 54 of your agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December to be a true record? OK, I will be signing those at some point during today's meeting. Item 4 is the summary list of actions. Could I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from our previous meetings? Thank you. Item 5, actions taken under delegated authority, pages 67 to 74. Could I ask the committee to note recent action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the letter to the Mayor of London regarding the environmental impacts of Heathrow expansion? Thank you. We've also had some responses to some of our outputs, and they're to be found on pages 75 to 90 of your agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to note the output responses that we've received from the Mayor of London and also the Executive Director of Parks for London, which have been attached as appendices? Thank you. Finally, we come to our main item of business, which is expanding heat networks in London. And part 3 just refers to the fact that we've already had 2 meetings on this topic. Thank you very much to our first panel of guests, and I would now like to welcome you to the meeting. We have Tom Brooke Bullard, who is the Interim Principal Policy Manager at Citizens Advice. You're very welcome. We have Richard Ellis, who is the Director of Sustainability at Peabody, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a large housing group. And we also have David Strong, who is also from Peabody, ditto in terms of being a large housing group. Right, we have a number of questions which we're going to put to you. And I'm afraid it starts with me, so just for a short period. We have actually got quite a lot of questions, so we're going to ask you, if you can, to be fairly succinct, and we may potentially interrupt you if we feel that you're not being succinct enough, but we will try not to do that. So I want to start, first of all, with Tom from Citizens Advice. Around half of all households connected to heat networks are in London. How well is London's approach to heat networks actually working? You will know it's on because it should have a red light. you have to press the button on the right-hand side.
This one. Sorry,
Okay.
apologies. Yeah, no, so that is a very good question. I guess the answer to that question, to some extent, lays in who you ask. So I think that the experience across London is probably very similar to the rest of the country in that it's characterised by extreme patchiness. So I think there are quite a lot of cases of people who have good experiences with heat networks, but I think, as often is the case, those experiences fly somewhat under the radar. So what we end up hearing about are the sort of the outlier cases where people have poor experiences. And I think a lot of those experiences are really quite stark in comparison to people on gas and electricity. So as a bit of a sort of overview, we took on our role as the statutory consumer advocate for heat network consumers, a role that we'd been doing in energy for some time, back in April, and since then we've been running a specialist advice service. And some of the kind of cases that have come through to that advice service that really stand out are cases involving very extreme sort of back billing, so people getting cases, being back billed for energy use sort of 7 years ago for thousands and thousands of pounds. Cases where people's, have extreme price shocks, so increases of up to 300% in their heating and heating costs, and also extreme cases where people are facing eviction because of housing debt. So I think while these aren't necessarily characteristic of the experience across London, I think you just have to look at some of the cases in local media and things like that to get a sense that the name, particularly when it comes to domestic consumers for heat networks, is quite a bad one for lots of people, and I think there's quite a lot of reticence about them. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to sort of improve the consumer experience and the consumer perception of them.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I have to say, after our first two meetings on heat networks, I've been contacted by quite a lot of people who have connections to heat networks, and they have had a number of different comments and stories, and that's both people contacting me on email, but also via social media and being very, very public about it. Peabody, I believe, has about 11,000 homes which are connected to heat networks. What has been Peabody's experience of heat networks in London? And I'm going to just look at Richard and David, and you can decide who will answer. You can fight.
Hi, I'll go first. So what we have found is we have heat networks that are 60 years old to ones that David delivered 2 weeks ago. The difference in who runs them, ESCOs run them, or whether or not we own them, or we get the energy from somewhere else, or whether we run them, who sets the tariff. Every single variation you can possibly have within a heat network and a heat network setup, we've probably got it. That does leave confusion for our residents. People think that as a landlord, it's us that provide the heat. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. So navigating that's quite a challenge. From what I see from a customer point of view is some customers are really quite nervous about the fact that they can't go to another provider. They're very used to going to a gas provider and changing from one provider to another, but you can't do that. Understanding of what a heat tariff is quite challenging for some people. They struggle with that. But actually, we have been keeping our prices relatively low. I think what you'll find when we start moving into Hentas and start looking at that, as people get a better handle on the performance of their heat networks and actually start really working that through, I think you're going to see prices increase, which is going to make it more difficult for our customers. So I think, that's what I'd probably want to say about it. But we have an awful lot of every single size and complexion that you would like to see.
Okay, well, that's interesting, and that's very helpful that you've been able to join us today, because obviously that diversity of experience will be something I'm sure members here will want to interrogate. Assembly Member Andrew Boff wanted to come in.
Yes, this is a question really to Citizens Vice, Mr. Bullard. If we take, for example, residents in Butterfly Court on the Weavers the Weavers estate in Barking and Dagenham, which is run by BD Energy. On the coldest day of the year, their hot water failed. Now, the residents there are curious as to where they can go to, and I'm curious as to whether or not the Citizens Advice keep a record of the complaints that they've had about particular estates, and whether or not that's something that we could interrogate.
Yeah, no, thank you. And yeah, that's a really concerning story, and unfortunately, that's not an isolated case. So I don't know the particulars of that.
I'd rather throw it at you, and I understand.
So, yeah,
that.
no, that's okay.
But for their benefit, what is that data collated?
Yeah, so we collect data about the location of the cases that come to our specialist advice service, and I think where possible we collect information about the particular heat network involved. So that's data that we definitely have at our fingertips, and we can have a look at that and see if any of those are coming through. In relation to cases involving people going off supply, so the main piece of advice that I would give to consumers is to try and contact their heat network and resolve it that way, yes, if they're unable to.
They do repeatedly.
Yeah, no, I imagine so. They can also contact the Citizens Advice Help Service, which is a free health service. Help service. Yeah, but we've seen lots of cases, very similar cases. I mean, cases of people being off supply for matters of weeks. With no resolution, obviously in the coldest months of the year, with this being an essential service, that's something that we're really concerned about. I mean, the other side of what Richard was talking about with HNTAS, which will be a very costly measure, is that it is aiming to bring up the standard of efficiency and the standard of reliability of heat networks. That's going to take quite a long time to feed through, but there are other things coming through, like guaranteed standards of performance, which should hopefully improve the sort of reliability of those services.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, you just mentioned, Richard, that some of the heat networks are your own heat networks, and you're also connected to other people's heat networks. What are the reasons why Peabody has connected to the various heat networks that you are connected to? Has this been led by London Plan policy when you've been doing new developments, or is this part of an overall Peabody strategy? And I can see that you're indicating that maybe David's going to come in on this one.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one and maybe just give a flavour of the more recent heat network designs and constructions that we've been party to. You know, as Richard said, you know, they can be of various sizes, you know, from 50 home built single building heat networks. The largest one that we have under construction at the moment is in Plumstead, and it's going to be about 1,800 homes connected to a ground source heat network and a centralised multi-building situation. And I think most of them are probably in our buildings or on our estates. I think the nuance about what Richard is saying there isn't necessarily that it's connecting to an external off-site heat network and bringing that heat into the site. It might be that the plant room or the piece of kit is sufficiently kind of small or not so complex that we could manage it in-house ourselves. But for example, that 1,800 home one in Plumstead is on a 40-year concession with an energy services company, an ESCO, which is a kind of a three-way agreement between ourselves, the developer, and then the energy services company. So obviously something of that scale and nature isn't something that Peabody automatically has the in-house expertise to own and run it. So we're asking a kind of an industry leader to kind of take that on effectively and enter into a deal for 40 years on that one. So so that, you know, that can be the nature and the reason for either us operating them ourselves or external parties or third parties kind of taking on the operation and maintenance.
Is there a strategic decision that underlies the going ahead with the connections to the different networks? I mean, are you given, for example, planning permission dependent upon connection to the heat networks as part of your the process at the beginning.
Yes, so certainly in the past, 5 and more years, the kind of the planning policy has determined that it's going to be a heat network solution, and then our internal processes and policy has been around determining, well, what is the best type of heat network that we can kind of put into that development. And it'll have, not to get too technical, but it'll have kind of 3 main areas that we would look at. The heat source itself, where's the heat going to come from? Are you going to burn gas? Are you going to go to air source? Are you going to go to ground source? The distribution of that heat around the block or the estate, and then the emitters of the heat within the home. How is the heat and hot water going to be given to the residents? So our internal processes started about 5 or 6 years ago with London Plan policy saying it shall be a heat network. Now, what's the best kind of combination of technology and process to establish that on an estate-by-estate basis? I would say more recently and in the past year or so, we've been looking at maybe the starting point shouldn't only be heat networks. So we're looking at a kind of a broader energy strategy kind of policy, which includes heat networks as a fundamental component, but we're not turning a complete blind eye to other technologies and maybe less centralised and more fragmented or home-by-home technologies that could, in the long run, be better for residents' bills, decarbonisation, etc.
So do you think the introduction of the proposed heat network zoning policies will help with that decision-making process of you looking at an overall energy mix? Is that something that you think will be helpful?
We do think it would be helpful, and I think we've said that in our consultation response.
Yeah.
The nuance of that is that what it allows you to do when you're scenario testing your estate by estate or project by project choices, that if you have an available heat network zone, then that becomes a kind of a more firm option to be scenario tested rather than an assumption that you're definitely going to do it. You know that if it is Corey Riverside, then you're going to know that that's going to be the likely option that then you test that one and the other options that would be available to you, which might be a wholly on-site district heat network, not run by Corey or something like that, or a fragmented home-by-home heating system. Yeah.
So at the risk of asking you to speak on behalf of the entire G15, plus every other registered social landlord in the country, do you think the heat network zoning policies are going to overall be welcomed by registered social landlords such as Peabody?
I think they will be right in the right places.
Okay.
Is what I would say. Some of the zones work really, really well and will continue to work really, really well where there's a density of energy need. But in other places, I'm not so sure.
Okay, so you're not completely convinced. And Tom, what do you feel about the heat network zoning policies? Is that something that that you would agree with Richard, that they've got to be in the right place where there's a sort of density of energy required?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree that obviously the overall aim of zoning is to make sure that they're in the right place geographically for both sort of efficiency and also sort of net zero targets and things like that. I think our overall feeling about zoning is that we think it makes quite a lot of sense, but I think we need to be really careful that we have all of the right consumer protections in place at the same time as zoning. I think that where we could run into problems is that the sort of mandatory connection rules, where there aren't the right consumer protections in place, could put consumers at risk and could also fundamentally undermine the whole project of sort of heat networks in the public eye. So I think getting that right is absolutely key to the success of zoning. Yeah,
that's why the committee has been looking at the sort of consumer side as well as all the sort of technical areas. You mentioned a connection of 1,800 properties in Plumstead, so that's South East London, and I'm aware of the Corey Riverside plant, which they're planning to double in size and then offer heat network connections to the enlarged energy from waste plant, which they've got a DCO for. How are the plans progressing, and what difference will the heat network zoning and related policies make to these plans, if any difference at all?
I can give you kind of a follow-up on the most recent kind of moves on that. I suppose the Plumstead one was happening and was in train and needed to kind of find its own solution rather than wait. As it was a project that was in gestation, more than 5 or 6 years ago, etc. We also have current and upcoming phases in South Thamesmead, which are again quite close to where Corey might be able to distribute heat. What we're doing on those is we're putting, again, not too technical, but valve pits in the ground, so that should pipes come down the road, we would be able to tap into those in due course. But obviously, in the interim period, those projects and estates need to serve themselves and make their best whole life cycle kind of decisions.
That's lucky. We are going to give them heating even before the Corey plant is ready.
Well, indeed.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. But also consider that, almost whether it happens or not, we need to be able to make a better or best whole life cycle decision for Peabody and for residents, whether the Corey pipes actually come down that street or otherwise. But do you want to say something more broadly?
Yeah, so just specifically around Corey, and I think actually I'm meeting them next week. We've been working for the last 12 months exclusively just to work out the financials and the commercials on it. We have to make sure that the price to the consumer is the right price. And the cost for the infrastructure from Corey to our estate, Thamesmead, our estate, there's a business case. And the other thing I'd just say around Thamesmead itself, 20 years ago it used to have a heat network and it was ripped out because it wasn't working very well and it wasn't managed very well. If the business case stacks up, we're going to have quite a lot of consultation with the residents who their families have been living there for many, many years, of saying, we're going back to something else and this is why it's going to be better. And that's why it's so crucial to have something which is really efficient and actually the price is right for it. So we're working on the business case. As soon as we've worked that out, if that goes ahead, then we will do that. But then obviously we've got to then start talking to our residents and explain to them what's going to happen, and also the 10% of leaseholders that are down there, about whether or not we can encourage them to join. So it's not just a technical problem, it's a people problem.
There's a number of problems. I mean, actually, you probably won't know this, but this committee visited Thamesmead, and we saw the coal dump and mould that had resulted from fitting the gas boilers. And obviously, the previous heating system would probably work better with the concrete construction properties. But I mean, obviously, the whole place is being redeveloped, not surprisingly, because of the thermal bridging. So it's never really worked, I don't think, as housing for humans, shall we say. But it's good to hear that you will be looking at price amongst all of the other aspects for that. OK, I'm going to move on now to Assemblymember Gareth Roberts, who is going to start with some questions about exactly that, the consumer experience.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. This is a question for Tom from Citizens Advice. A lot of this has been covered off, I appreciate, but if you were to name the, say, 3 biggest issues affecting heat network users in London, what would they be?
Sure, yeah, and again, I would say sort of these are fairly similar to the experience outside of London as well. But if I had to name the top 3, I think, and it is worth saying, I think they sort of reflect the concerns that people have in gas and electricity to some degree. It's just that the more extreme cases have much higher detriment than in gas and electricity. So I think the first one, and overwhelmingly the first one actually, I think it's around 57% of cases that we've seen through to our advice services around billing, which is no surprise. I mean, your bill sort of ends up being often the thing that you care most about, and that can involve sort of billing errors. And then, but the sort of one that we see a lot more than in gas and electricity is catch-up bills, really high catch-up bills. It's worth saying to some extent that will be closed off, or that risk will be addressed by the incoming regulations later this month. But yeah, that's a big one. And then other ones that we see a lot of, so like, again, sort of a large amount around kind of financial strain. So people who have seen huge jumps in the cost that they're paying for their heat and housing. not housing, sorry, heat and hot water. And then there's probably like another set around, which is sort of related, but around sort of debt and disconnection. So one thing that we're seeing in cases that we definitely don't see in the retail energy market are cases where people are being directly disconnected from their heating and hot water because of debt, and that's something that doesn't really happen in gas and electricity, although people are moved on to prepayment meters and disconnection sort of happens as a byproduct that way. But in this case, we're seeing those directly. And then I'm just going to add a fourth one, because I think the sort of reliability point is a big one as well. People sort of suffering outages for long periods of time.
Okay, thank you. And when the Citizens Advice became the statutory advocate in April, I think, now people don't usually come to Citizens Advice when they're thrilled about things, but were you expecting the level of concerns, issues, comments raised, or is this roughly in line with what you were expecting to get once you took over the role?
To be honest, I would say it's roughly in line with what we were expecting, but it is worth saying that we were expecting some quite sort of extremely poor consumer experiences at the sort of outlier cases. It's something that we've been concerned about. We've been calling for the regulation of heat networks since 2017. So we released a report sort of on the consumer experience there and calling for it to be regulated then. So it's something that we've been concerned about for a long time.
Is it possible we could get sent a copy of that report? And I'm
Yeah.
sure if we've got it, but that would be very helpful.
Absolutely.
It's all part of the evidence. And in terms of the people who live in private accommodation versus those in social housing, do you find that those who are living in social housing are more affected by the issues than other groups?
That's to be totally honest with you, at the sort of level of data that we have at this sort of early stage, I wouldn't be able to confidently answer that question. We definitely we can sort of definitely make certain educated guesses about that. I think that there are certain experiences in social housing, particularly around the way that debt is managed, particularly where housing costs are bundled in with heating costs, that we're particularly concerned about. But I wouldn't be able to say that that's not a case in the private sector as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So I think Assemblymember Polanski wanted to come in at this point.
Go to my next question.
Okay.
Morning. Tom, 26th of January 2026 marks the point at which Ofgem will be responsible for regulating heat networks. What difference do you think this will make?
I think it will absolutely make a difference to consumers, but I think, and there are lots of, it's sort of, as a sort of a bit of an overview of the way that it will work, the authorisation conditions which will come in from the 27th of January are sort of designed to, in many ways, sort of mirror what's already existing in gas and electricity. So the immediate and sort of the greatest impact will be around things like billing, so rules around how long suppliers can back bill customers for, rules around treatment of vulnerable consumers, having to have a priority services register, having to treat vulnerable consumers in the way that they're treated in the retail energy market, and then rules around sort of debt and disconnection. So I think those are really, really important. It is worth saying, though, that that's very much the start of the regulation journey. So as Richard and David will know all too well, there are loads and loads of heat networks across the country, and they're sort of huge variance in size and huge variance in age and all of these things. And one thing is that not only do lots of consumers not know that they're on a heat network, we've heard of cases where heat networks don't know that they are a heat network. So it's not as if lots of this regulation will, there will be compliance from day one. It's absolutely the start of the journey, and suppliers will have a year to register with Ofgem. So it's definitely not a big bang moment, but it's definitely the start of a journey that will improve the consumer experience. There are some really big elements that are missing and that we'd want to be focused on in the first year. So one of those is, and we'll get onto this, but around pricing. So I think we need to be really clear with consumers that it's not going to be exactly the same situation as they would expect in the retail market. So there isn't going to be a price cap. There are pricing protections, but we'll sort of get on to what they do and don't include there. And then one area that we're particularly concerned about is this, and I've sort of referenced before, but where heating costs are bundled with housing costs, so rent or service charge. And there's lots of ways that the interaction of those regulatory systems mean that some of these protections won't apply to those bundled consumers, and that's about a third of consumers. And there are certain risks, particularly around the way that debt is treated for those consumers, that we think needs to be urgently addressed.
Just continuing on that thread, can I ask you about fair pricing protections? So if you have any concerns, obviously clearly you do, but about the government response and the Ofgem consultation.
Yeah, so I think our view on the fair pricing consultation is that there's lots in there that's really positive. We definitely agree with the sort of principle around fair pricing, and we think that what Ofgem are doing in terms of first of all trying to address pricing transparency and sort of collecting that data and having that transparency for consumers and also for their own sort of benchmarking of prices across the board is a good one. We would have liked to have seen more sort of prescriptive principles within that. There's only one around the way that costs are passed on to consumers, around fines and things like that. I think that it's difficult, and like we might talk about like in relation to a price cap later, but I think it is very difficult because of the variance in the way that heat networks are run and their age and their size and their business model and all of these things. There is huge variance in the costs and the pricing structures. So I think in lots of ways, a lot of that needs to be addressed further upstream, whether that's through a sort of input price cap or something like that. But I think for us, there's a lot more that needs to be done. It's a good step, but I think there are also things that government need to do to sort of bring those prices down as well.
And that was going to be my final question to you, if you support a cap, but it sounds like you're saying it's complicated.
Yes, in short, it's complicated. Yeah, I don't think that a cap in the way that it works in the retail space would be possible. I think for us, what we would like to see as a sort of first step towards better pricing protections, whether that includes a price cap, are sort of continued gathering of that data by Ofgem and benchmarking to try and understand how some form of price cap could work. I think government are exploring a sort of call for input at a later date about pricing sort of further on, and whether that could, yeah, there are lots of options like a sort of input price cap, which would affect the sort of wholesale price that heat networks are paying for energy before it's fed through. But then there are lots of things around the efficiency of the heat network that varies across the board.
Thank you. Richard and David, just two questions really. I don't mind who answers them. One is around the fair pricing protections, and in your consultation response to us, you talked about the GLA role in that. So it'd just be interesting to hear a little bit more of how you see that being coordinated, and then if you would support caps as well.
Can I answer the second one first?
Sure.
Similarly to Tom, if we look across our tariffs and our structures, that standing charges that we have, to put a fair pricing tariff on would be really, really difficult. It depends on the size, the energy input, so electricity, heat networks, air source heat networks, which we want and David's delivering to decarbonise, are more expensive than gas ones. Building age, the age of the network and how we're doing it, who's running it and what we're doing is they're really, really complex. So you're seeing a huge range of those. So I think that we absolutely agree that transparency, standardisation of billing is a really, really good thing, and it's something that we've been asking for a while. But it's going to take some time to shake out get the efficiencies right and I don't think that you could turn around next week and say that's what the figure for your tariff is or your standing charge should be. It's too much of a disparity, and if we did bring something like that in, that would mean that us as a housing association would have to then decide, are we subsidising the heat networks, or are we building new homes, or are we, it's got to come from somewhere within our business plan. In terms of whether GLA has a role, I think, yes, you do have a role, absolutely, but I wouldn't want to have from my point of view, and this is probably just my point of view, Ofgem already having a fair pricing regime coming in, I don't think I'd want a second one on that. But I think where the GLA can really help, and something which I know on the Zero Carbon Accelerator and other, we've got so many heat networks that we can really show what's working and what's not working, and then how we can improve and how we can improve quickly so that actually you can move more quickly towards a fairer pricing set of tariffs.
Thank you. David, did you want to?
Yeah, I just had a couple of points to add to that. The idea of the question of any outstanding kind of concerns or additional things. I think something that's worth looking at, in addition to ensuring people aren't making excessive profits, etc., is the things that really do make up the component parts of the fixed and the variable charges that people pay for. Obviously, the variable one is like the fuel cost and how much energy people use. The fixed stuff, there is a component of that we've certainly seen kind of proposals in the past where the capital expenditure of building the heat network and putting it in place can actually be kind of filtered into the residents' bills for the subsequent decades, etc. So even though that's not necessarily going to show up as developer profit or asset owner profit, it's a kind of a way of bringing money from future residents into the present to kind of reduce the cost of building it in the first place. So that what has been called connection charge, or bringing capital expenditure into the present day is a component that's worth watching out for on behalf of residents. And yeah, in terms of the benchmarking piece, I agree with the other speakers that it's very complicated when we've run through scenarios to try and check and determine the best balanced heat network solution. We've come up against kind of unrealistic comparators, where you're trying to say, well, it's only X amount more expensive than a gas boiler, or Y amount more expensive than a combined heat and power driven network. But obviously those are unrealistic comparators because we're trying to decarbonise, we're trying to use electricity and clean power, etc. So bring the kind of the more realistic comparators into the benchmarking discussion would be helpful then for people who are trying to select the best balanced solutions.
Thank you very much. Thanks Chair.
I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Turrell at this point.
Thank you, Chair. And this question's to Tom. Is there any redress for consumers dissatisfied with the service they're receiving from their heat network?
So from April, at the same time as we assumed our statutory role, the Ombudsman also became the sort of statutory alternative redress service for heat networks. There is still a process alongside the sort of registering with Ofgem for suppliers to register with the Ombudsman. So I would say that coverage is like fairly patchy, and also prior to regulation, the redress mechanisms are lower. I mean, there has been since actually I haven't got the exact date, but for many years has been the Heat Trust, which is a voluntary consumer organisation, which
we had them at our first of the meetings in this investigation.
Oh, brilliant!
Yeah.
Yes. So suppliers who are registered with the Heat Trust have had consumers on those heat networks have had sort of routes of redress for some time. But yeah, I would say the main thing I would say is it's characterised by being a pretty sort of patchy service and quite nascent as well.
And do you think providers are sufficiently motivated to provide exceptional customer service? Because you take, because there's a complete lack of competition in the market, obviously due to the nature of how they work. But you take, I won't name my supplier, but in the event that my supplier was to provide insufficient customer service to me, I would, but actually I'm quite happy with them, so I can't name and shame them. But if they were to provide less than satisfactory customer service, I have the option of going to another provider. Heat network customers don't have that. So does the Ombudsman have sufficient teeth to motivate providers to provide that customer service?
So, so cases that end up with the Ombudsman, there will end up that being a sort of financial settlement. So there's teeth there. I think more broadly, the question around motivation for suppliers in what is a sort of essentially sort of local monopoly markets is a really appropriate one. And I think that's why I think we're supportive of a lot of the sort of starting point that Ofgem has taken to sort of mirror lots of the licence conditions within the retail space. But there are quite a few areas where we are keen to see the regulator go quite a bit further in recognition of the fact that this is a monopoly market. You can't just switch supplier. You'd have to move home, which for lots of people isn't practical or possible. So one example of that, I think, is around disconnection, so prepayment meter rules. So currently they're going to be brought in line with how they are in the retail space. There are lots of reasons around kind of the fact that there are only a handful of suppliers in the retail space and also certain voluntary commitments and their reputations that mean that they actually go above the existing protections. It remains to be seen whether heat networks do the same thing. So I think, and as we said with pricing, I think like there is to some extent a mechanism within the retail space, less so now since prices have escalated so much, but to bring prices down through competition, and that clearly won't be the case with heat networks.
I'm going to come to Assemblymember Prince first, and then I'm going to come to Assemblymember Roberts. Did you still want to come in?
Not really, no.
Okay. Well, in which case, I'm going to go straight to Assemblymember Roberts, who did want to come in.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the Ombudsman and the financial penalties which get levied. Is that a regular thing, or is it a custom more honoured in the breach than the observance?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question now. I can take that one away and get back to you.
Thank you.
If you could, that would be really helpful.
Thank you. This is a question for Peabody. Is there enough information for Londoners considering moving into a property which is part of a heat network with all of the benefits, disbenefits and issues which may be arising? I mean, Citizens Advice may have a view as well, of course.
I can maybe mention what we try to do at the resident moving in perspective. So we have a new homes and customer care team who kind of move in any new residents, whether they're rental or shared ownership or market sale residents, and we have a kind of a standardised approach. It doesn't matter if you're renting or buying, but we kind of treat everybody the same in relation to that. Part of what we're trialling at the moment is a better way to kind of communicate more complicated information. So we have things like a QR code on your heating system that you can kind of as well as get the face-to-face handover kind of information, but you have a QR code that you can then check that on your phone and receive a kind of a video play of how this system works and the things to bear in mind, etc. So we're trying to improve our start of residency kind of experience for everybody. But obviously that's not standardised across the industry or across the market generally. So I suppose taking something like that and almost perhaps mandating that or making that a kind of a standard process that any kind of new resident moving in, whether that's the first resident or subsequent lettings or purchases, that there's some sort, at the moment you have to hand over an energy performance certificate with a new home or a new let, etc. So would there be a similar mandated piece of here's what you're about to move into when it comes to a heat network or heating, here's the explanation of your fixed and variable charges, here's the options that you do and don't have, etc. Some sort of standardised kind of template could be helpful for the market broadly.
Okay, so I suppose it's a bit more difficult, particularly for those people who are moving into social rented accommodation, because given the paucity that the lack of accommodation that there is, they're faced with no real choice. It is you either take the flat with the heat network, whereas I suppose people who are buying on the open market or perhaps going for shared ownership, there's a bit more flexibility for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom, you seem to nod lightly when I asked the question.
Yeah, no, I think what I would say on that front is a really quite large number of the cases that we've seen through to our advice service are people who, in the first instance, haven't even known that they're on a heat network. So we know that somewhere along the process this isn't currently happening. And I think a lot of the sort of information that I think some sort of information sheet like the EPC one is a good idea. And I think the question is how you lay out that information in a way that's clear for customers and gives them a clear sense of what their rights are and what their expectations should be. So I think, like, at a minimum, you would want people to be aware of the fact that it is essentially a monopoly service, of like of some transparency around what their pricing is and whether their pricing is bundled and what the implications of that are. Any information about like what support is available and what forms of redress are available and things like that.
Tom, could you put the microphone a bit sort of...
Oh, sorry.
Maybe move it a bit closer.
Yes, of course.
It seems to be moved away a bit.
By
Thank
the
you.
base.
There we go, by the base.
There we are. That's much louder, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and any sort of relevant... I mean, one of the complexities is that often these things interlink with people's leasehold agreements and things like that. So it needs to be also clear what the implications for leaseholders are as well when they move into a new property.
Excellent. Well, by great good fortune, as I often say, this is what happens when we get informed people answering the questions. My next question was going to be, what would help improve the information available to people about heat network costs? And I think that you've just answered that already.
Well done. Next
Yes.
question.
Thank you, Chair.
OK, thank you very much, Assembly Member Roberts. I'm going to move on to Assembly Member Clark, who's now going to start by asking about the impact of technical standards.
Thank you very much, and good morning to the panel. I'm going to come to you probably first, Richard. What impact will the proposed heat network technical assurance scheme have for new and existing heat networks?
Well, I think I'll let David answer for the new ones, but for our existing, it's going to be pretty expensive.
Yeah.
It's going to be very expensive for us to move. As I said before, we have things which are biomass boilers, electric, gas, 60 years old, to something that was handed over pre-2014 is where we'll probably have to spend most of our money on those. So we have 50-odd heat networks of that size. We've got to put metering in to these and then agree consumer agreements as well with residents that are on, have been using service charges and quite used to that. We tried that at a place called Strawberry Vale 4 or 5 years ago, and the residents just said, no, we're not accepting it. So we've got quite a lot. So the technical is going to be expensive because we are having to upgrade an awful lot of systems and put in the new monitoring systems that the HENTAS will require. The view, when I've cast around from others as well, the view is that the improvement works within 8 years is going to be a real challenge.
Yeah.
And also what we're finding is that staff resources are really difficult. There aren't many people in there who understand networks and how to improve them. The supply chains are moving around quite a lot at the moment. There's a lot of change within those. So we will do the best that we can to improve what we've got, but it is going to be very expensive, and there will be some element that will have to be passed on to consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember that at Strawberry Vale. I'm also a councillor in Barnet, and that you know, the residents were obviously very upset at that point, and I'm glad it didn't proceed at that point. But I mean, given the costs, though, you're saying that it'll be a concern, I imagine, for citizens' advice as well. That some of these residents are, you know, simply unable to afford price increases, and how are you going to protect your residents from that?
The only thing that we can do, we can make as much use of the grants as possible that are available for improving on the technical side. That should then improve efficiency, which will then help bring down some of the tariff. But we have had to employ 6 people, I think, in the heat networks team, and that is a cost that we can't just. If we move that to somewhere else, it means that someone else isn't getting a kitchen, or we're not building something else. So, at some point, we have to get. We can't be subsidising it too much, unfortunately. So we can make it as efficient as possible, but subsidy would be a difficult thing for us to do.
David.
And just, I suppose, in relation to design and construction of new build heat networks, technical assurance is obviously beneficial to the kind of the broader industry. I think what we found in recent years is that the supply chain of consultants, contractors and clients like ourselves, we're all just about half a step ahead of one another or behind one another. And so having technical assurance across the industry is going to be helpful, rather than you trying to kind of generate expertise and ability in your little part of the market in isolation, etc. So and I suppose that this slight benefit we have on the new build side of things is that those costs can be capitalised, can be made part of the overall capital construction costs, so maybe less of a hit or a drag on the organisation as in relation to existing heat networks. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we are housing providers, and now we've become energy operators.
Yeah.
And that wasn't what we originally were set up for. So we don't have the economies of scale that British Gas have. So it's going to take us a while to work out exactly how to do this as efficiently as possible.
No, that makes sense. So, Tom, obviously, citizen advice, I imagine you do have concerns about the increasing costs to residents, in terms of building compliance. Do you have any suggestions for ways to mitigate these potential impacts?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really, really sort of a tough question in terms of mitigating the impacts of the costs of HNTAS. I mean, it's worth sort of remembering up front that a lot of the heat networks which have particularly high costs at the moment, a big portion of why those costs are so high are because they are inefficient and old heat networks. So it does need to happen. Those heat networks and new heat networks need to be either upgraded or built to a standard where they're much, much more efficient, because gas is a huge portion of the overall bill in the end. But that being said, we do have concerns about how those costs could end up being passed on to consumers. It's probably, I think we would be keen for suppliers to explore as many ways as possible to apportion those costs fairly and to apportion them sort of over time where they can. But it is, there are problems. I mean, a lot of the heat networks which will end up being most expensive to upgrade are likely to be ones that are already more expensive because they are inefficient. And there's obviously a fairness point there. And I think where possible, avoiding sort of those costs being passed through as just huge costs on leaseholders in big chunks. And there is work that MHCLG is doing around the leasehold reform stuff, which should help in terms of leasehold costs. But I think that anything that can be done to prevent that, I think, is really important.
Sounds like a whole new topic, actually, but it's one of these things that I think we all see the sense in it, but it's the cost and how we apportion that. And obviously, people having warm homes is also a fairness issue. And as you rightly said, a lot of these old systems and older homes are, not well served by heat. No, thank you for that. It's very interesting. And back to you, Chair.
Okay, so we've got the next area on heat networks, targets and zoning. And are you going to ask about zoning as well?
This is part 3.
Oh, no. Oh, yes, it is. You're right. We won't ask. We're not going to ask you about. Sorry, I've completely decided that we're only having one panel today. If not, that's a question for the next panel. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and answering all of our questions, particularly on the consumer side and the impact of the new technical standards. Very interesting, the last questions there at the end. We're now going to adjourn for 5 minutes so that we can move on to the other panel and ask them further questions. So I'll just restart today's meeting. That's the gavel restarts the webcast. You weren't. It wasn't that you were being disruptive. Welcome back to the first of the 2026 Environment Committee meetings and our third meeting on heat networks and our second panel of today. We are now going to continue our discussion with our new set of expert guests. We have Ludo Tolu, who is the Deputy Director of Heat Networks Policy at the National Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We've also got John Allison, who's the Deputy Director of Heat Network Delivery also from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. And we also have from the GLA, we have Natasha Valladares, who is the head of energy at the GLA, and we also have Gabriele Caprotti, who is the joint interim head of infrastructure at the GLA. So thank you very much for joining us for the second part, but possibly longer session on heat networks this morning. I'm going to pass back to Assembly Member Anne Clark. I almost got her to ask the first set of questions to the previous set of guests, but she very swiftly intervened and is far more sensible than the chair, clearly.
Yes. Anyway, good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with DESNZ. And obviously, I mean, as we all know in this room, heat networks have a huge range of benefits and impacts and all that. But in terms of government's plans for heat network zoning, which is the most important? Which is the most important benefit? And Ludo, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll take that question. Thanks, Anne. So in terms of heat network zoning, we're driving the lowest cost, low carbon heat networks where they make sense. And places like London, they will often make sense because you've got multi-occupancy buildings, maybe buildings that don't have space for individual heating solutions. Or you also have access to surplus heat. So within the zoning, our heat network growth is really driven by that low cost, low carbon, and we think both are achievable. Thanks.
John?
Thank you. I think just to add to that, I think the benefits will be in London often felt in, we think probably over 50% of the city is going to be suitable for heat coming from zones. I just want to reflect a little bit on the point around, again, these benefits being felt in some places and in the right places. I'm sure we'll touch on this some more when we come on to the details of zoning, but we have evidence from our zoning model that identifies where we think heat networks should be the lowest cost, low carbon solution, but there's a really important local role to take that data and refine it locally to define the precise boundaries of zones to make sure those benefits are felt in all places as and when zoning goes ahead.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to come to the GLA now, and I think I'll come to Natasha. The question as drafted, which is why are expanding heat networks a priority for the mayor? I mean, I think we all know. I guess what I'd really like to get from that, though, is given all the priorities in London, and especially with the pressure on London to build, how are we both addressing that need while also hearing very clearly from a range of sectors that the cost of building is going up? I suppose, what is the risk if we don't expand heat networks?
So I think you're absolutely right. There's a huge range of priorities we have for London and for Londoners. And heat networks have to form part of that as one of the tools available to us to decarbonise our buildings and provide the capital with clean energy, cleaner air, and reduce inequalities that arise from that for Londoners, particularly the most marginalised Londoners. But as you say, that has to be balanced with the need to drive forward the delivery of affordable housing and to ensure that we have continued investment into the capital. I think where we stand on this is that we are really keen to progress heat networks where they are the lowest cost, lowest carbon option, but not to progress them universally at all costs, and to make sure that we are making sure they're never a blocker to the delivery of affordable housing, and that they are never delivered in a way which is to the detriment of Londoners, particularly marginalised Londoners. So difficult to unpick.
I guess the question is, how do we avoid that? How do we avoid putting these in at the detriment of the most marginalised, poorest Londoners? I mean, that would be my question.
Of course, understood. I think it really is a case-by-case basis, and looking at the role for London as the strategic authority with the rest of London government at how we localise the zoning regulations and look at where they best fit the needs in the particular areas. It does have to be taken on balance in every case. I think the reality is that we know we need to move to low carbon solutions for heating, and heat networks in many cases will be the best way to do that. And where that is the case, that's the solution that we'll pursue.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Gabrielle, do you want to come in?
Maybe I'll just add to what Natasha was saying. Maybe two things in terms of just maintaining a sort of a broader, holistic approach to meeting net zero targets and the decarbonisation journey that we're on in London specifically. I think there's a piece of work that is happening at the moment around refreshing the London infrastructure framework. So that's really about trying to identify the priorities that are required in terms of infrastructure investment across London in order to meet economic growth, housing, and net zero targets. And I think one of the preliminary expectations that we have is that this piece of work will validate the need to start to push heat networks. So I think that's one aspect to mention. But I think, again, going back to the risks and benefits, I think the economies of scale that are associated with heat network delivery are particularly encouraging. Mm-hmm. And some of the technical work that we may reference a bit later on indicates that, close to 15% of London's heat could be met via heat networks that the GLA has identified. So there's definitely sort of a need to maintain that sort of risk and benefit approach.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, it certainly seems that other cities have been able to push further ahead than London has so far, although, as we established earlier, about 50% of heat network connections are in London nationally. What do you think has held us back? We heard at one of our earlier meetings from Birger Lausen, and he was talking about Copenhagen and Denmark. Why have they been able to push ahead so much more thoroughly? Have they taken a different approach on infrastructure, Gabriele? Is that the issue?
So presumably when you talk about other cities, you're talking about international cities. I think it's probably worth noting that the UK, but obviously London has a different regulatory context to some of those other cities. I think it's fair to say that heat networks are now a proven technology. Many of the other cities have made significant progress, and there have been efforts to share some of that knowledge and expertise between those countries and cities with London. I think one of to name a few of the challenges, because I think that there have been a number of challenges involved with the planning and delivery of heat networks, but a big one is associated with the need for regulation. So I think it has taken some time for stakeholders to come together to agree that heat networks would need to become a regulated sector, much in the same way that water, gas and power are regulated sectors. And so I think we've welcomed the arrival of regulation in 2026. And I think there's probably something to be said about many of the heat networks that are proposed and have been identified as potential heat networks, specifically in London, will be unlocked as soon as further detail emerges in terms of zoning coordination, the role that different stakeholders will play, not just for GLA, and how stakeholders can come together to move forward on that sort of shared endeavour. So I think there's been a number of sort of broad regulatory challenges that I think both the UK and local government have progressively been turning their attention towards.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's an interesting point about regulation. I've been on this committee since 2016 and we've spoken on numerous occasions to Thames Water, and I'm sure most members of the committee will have views of the water regulator, Ofwat, possibly some of those views shared by the current government who've made moves to change the way it operates. However, I'm going to move on from that and I'm going to move to Assembly Member Prince, who's going to pick up the questioning. Can you use your microphone as well?
Oh, yeah, maybe.
No one else is interested.
Just
anyway.
being old-fashioned here.
So this is to the GLA. Good morning. The Mayor's preferred pathway to net zero includes reaching 460,000 heat network connections in London by 2030. How is London progressing against this target and how are you monitoring this?
So I think it's fair to say that the data is not where we would like it to be able to monitor connections accurately or fully. And a lot of that comes from the fact that the sector's been unregulated to date, so we're expecting that to really improve going forwards and for us to be able to get a really good grip on exactly how many connections there are and how many connections are being introduced as we go forward. The 460,000 figure is indicative of the sort of scale that we need to achieve alongside other measures to reach net zero on that pathway. But I think it's important to note that the way in which we get to that can flex. So it can be that as more connections are identified, that we look to have more connections to reach that target, or we might see that there are other opportunities that present themselves alongside that through the other decarbonisation measures that we're looking at. So it is kind of a wider picture of decarbonisation, of which 460,000 connections is kind of the estimated approximate sort of level of scale we would look to see to get to net zero.
Good. And do you think that will be achieved by 2030 in 4 years' time?
I think there's a lot of challenges. I think that there's a lot that we need to see come into place in terms of how the regulations play out, how the zoning comes into play. I think we need to see the investment and take-up of the zoning that we're looking at to make sure that we do get those connections coming into play. We do know it's a long process to see a heat network come to full fruition from the early planning stages, but we are already working with local authorities and other public sector partners to scope out what might be possible in terms of expansions of existing networks and new networks through our zero carbon accelerator work. So we continue to work ambitiously towards that target, is what I would say. Not that it is a target, but that kind of indicative figure.
So do you expect to achieve that target?
I think it's something, like I say, that it's an indicative number.
It's a very simple question, isn't it, really? It's either a yes or a no.
We're working towards it as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. I won't give you too hard a time.
Just to amplify what Keith is saying, in one of our previous panels, we were talking to someone who'd been developing a heat network and had originally agreed with Enfield Council that it was going to be a heat network of 6,000 properties. And at the time of our meeting, it was only supplying 2,000 properties because the other 4,000 properties actually hadn't been built, let alone the heat network built. So perhaps in the context of those kind of difficulties, is it realistic for anybody to talk about achieving 460,000 heat network connections by 2030, which is, in my maths, 4 years away? So that's a lot of connections. That's more than 100,000 connections each year. And we still won't be there. We'll be 60,000 short.
So our data's imperfect, as I said, because it's self-reported, there's likely lots of issues with it, but we estimate that at the moment we have around 256,000 consumers on heat networks in London.
Does the Mayor make a contribution to these heat networks at all, or does he have no involvement at all when someone chooses to install a heat network?
So I think this is where the figure relies on the wider London picture, because the heat network delivery is coming through lots of different routes. We certainly don't, as London, mandate connection at this time, and it's something that...
The question wasn't about mandating, it was about funding.
Oh, okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Do we give a grant? So maybe I'll blame myself for that.
No, don't worry.
Do we give a grant to anybody who's thinking about doing a heat network?
We provide some grant funding as well as some support through specialist expertise that we've procured through the Zero Carbon Accelerator and previously through other accelerator programs that the GLA runs. So at the moment we have...
Don't worry about the numbers. So it's very easy then, isn't it? We give you a grant, you give us the figures, and surely when you agree to give a grant, you make it mandatory that they will report back on the connections and the figures. Surely.
I think what's complicated, so the grant funding that we provide is revenue funding for project development, so to scope out, do the feasibility, assess what's possible with the expansion or creation of heat networks. We don't provide the capital funding to deliver the build itself.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. If you're giving someone money, you can ask them for something in return, can't you? One of which would be when and if you do it, we want to know how many you've done. It's got to be fairly simple, that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are just in such early stages. The funding that we're providing is, like I said, only at feasibility, that it hasn't gone through to the fruition of the connections existing.
All right. So this is to our other friends. The government has set a target of 20% of heat demand coming from heat networks by 2050, compared with 3% now. Have you set any interim targets for 2030, or 2040?
We do not have interim targets for 2030 or 2040. The Warm Homes Plan will be published soon, and in that we do set out a trajectory of growth for heat networks. So you'll have to wait for that report, I'm afraid.
Bated breath. But so we will have a pathway then. We will have great, because without interim targets, it's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah, it's good. Thank you. I've just got one other question I'd like to ask. The target, or the targets, both panels, focuses on the number of connections rather than outcomes for residents. Before pushing for hundreds of thousands of more Londoners to be locked into heat networks, what evidence do we have that existing customers are receiving reliable, affordable heat? And why should residents have forced upon them this monopoly where they don't have the freedom to choose who their supplier is and to get the best value?
So in terms of the connections figure, it's, like I said, focused really on the scale that we need to achieve net zero, not like an absolute requirement in that we would do that to the detriment of Londoners in other ways. What we're looking at is what the regulator is going to be able to do to protect consumers, and certainly it's the GLA's priority that consumers are protected and that pricing is fair and that connections are reliable. So we'll be looking to the regulator as they introduce those regulations to provide that. Sorry.
So will you be insisting on some kind of a cap that is linked to everyday consumer prices for gas and or electricity? Or are we just going to go mad to hit a figure that we're not even sure we're going to hit and punish people because they don't have a choice of where they can choose to buy their energy?
I think it's a question for the regulator about whether or not they introduce a price cap, but certainly the GLA will be seeking that fair pricing is in place for consumers.
It's not really a case for the regulator, is it? It's the GLA who are trying to impose these monopolies upon the consumer. It's a bit like the mayor and his ULEZ, isn't it? He chose to impose it upon people who couldn't afford it, and now he's choosing to impose. And we've got lots of evidence that these heat networks are not affordable for the poor people who have had them forced upon them. It's for the mayor to step in and say, yep, we want these heat networks. Yes, there is a benefit to achieving net zero, but actually this has to be affordable. Otherwise, it's just not fair.
And I would say that we're not imposing heat networks. The zoning regulations will mandate the connection in some cases, as we understand it, but subject to what comes out when they're finally published. I don't know if you want to jump in on
I
that
could
part.
comment on the wider regulatory picture. And I think a useful thing to remember here is that our existing heat networks are different from the heat networks we will build through zoning in a few key ways. I mean, you've already heard from the previous panel about the diversity of heat networks, whether they're like communal or district heating, the sort of buildings they serve, the fuel that supplies them, and so on and so forth. So when we look at existing heat networks, we have run surveys in the past, the Heat Network Consumer and Operator Survey. The last one was a few years ago, before the sort of energy price crisis, so it's not entirely reliable anymore in terms of the latest experience. But when we ran that survey, most heat network consumers were well satisfied when compared to a comparable sample of consumers. And that suggests the service they were receiving was positive. I think it was our colleague from the Citizens Advice who said what we're seeing now is the outliers. And I don't want to sort of suggest that those don't need to be heard, and we absolutely need a system in place to meet their needs and to improve their outcomes, because they're absolutely unacceptable where they've not got heat supply during the coldest days of the year. That's absolutely unacceptable. But those existing heat networks, some of them are incredibly old, incredibly inefficient, whereas the heat networks that are going to be introduced now under zoning will be expected to offer a price that is competitive to the counterfactual that building would otherwise face. And so they'll be looking, so heat network developer will be looking to sort of price compete in that way. It's in their interest. They'll be able to secure a connection, but will they be able to supply heat unless they offer a good price? They won't. And they know that. And as government, what we need to do is think about all the ways we can help bring those costs down so that those heat networks are competitive. So I do like to draw that distinction between the two categories.
So there's two easy options, isn't there? Either there's a capping that is linked to the retail market, and/or actually, you give people the choice. They can tap into their heat sort network, or they can go with another provider.
I think there's two things to say there. One is on the price cap. Again, I think our colleague from Citizens Advice spoke to the difficulties of applying a price cap at the moment, where there's insufficient data, there's a great diversity and variance in the market. And actually, it would be almost foolish to apply a price cap at this stage, because you could set it wrong immediately. In fact, it's almost expected that you'll set the wrong cap, because we don't have the data to say what that cap should be.
Well, it may be foolish to you, but if I was on the wrong end of having to pay, there's an example where someone's paying £3,000 a year for their heat, it wouldn't appear very foolish to me. And of course, if we find a situation that the cap's not workable for these old, exhausted networks, then people can go and choose an alternative provider. I just think, as always, the people are being punished because somebody wants to achieve net zero by a date that we don't really know or even think it's going to be achieved. Someone else is trying to achieve a substantial figure by 2030, but it's all pie in the sky, isn't it, really? And the only people who are paying for it are the poor people who actually can't afford it.
Well, I'll say a few things there. So obviously I can't comment on the London targets. On a price cap, the incredible diversity in the sector would make it simply impossible. But this is why Ofgem's coming in, and they're going to be collecting pricing data, and then they'll set pricing benchmarks, and then pricing regulation will evolve, because it could, but it needs to start from a common base of knowledge that allows the regulator to intervene in the most effective way. We can't do it any other way. I think if you sort of set a price cap and you give hope to a consumer that will solve problems, it's actually misleading, because what you might introduce is if you set that cap too low, you could drive heat networks into insolvency or create a whole range of other problems, and who's bearing that cost? So I just wanted to sort of make that point. But on the requirement to connect under zoning, when zoning is introduced, there will be a requirement to connect for buildings, but domestic buildings, like individual homes, will not be within that requirement. And also the requirement to connect will have a range of exemptions applied to it, and we would expect the local authorities, acting as the zoning coordination body, would choose when to exercise the right to connect, the requirement to connect, and will only do so when they think it is possible. And we have been honest and clear with heat network developers that our expectation is that they have to compete on price. They have to think about the pricing, and they cannot solely rely on a requirement to connect buildings, because that's not how we achieve this transition.
All sounds a bit Big Brother to me, but thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, there's some interesting points there, and I think your point about legacy systems is well made, which is actually when I was talking about the number of heat networks connections that we need to achieve, I wasn't actually including very many of the existing systems, because very many of these legacy systems, £3,000 would be cheap for some of the people that I spoke to in Southwark, for example, where there's some very elderly systems that are very, very expensive for people to run. Now, I think Assemblymember Polanski is indicating that you don't want to come in at this point. Assemblymember Turrell, did you still want to come in with an additional point to make here?
No.
Or are you're comfortable for us to move on to Assemblymember Roberts?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. This is a question for DESNZ, and we just touched on this a moment ago. The Warm Homes Plan and government consultation on zoning plans was expected to be published in autumn 2025 and then December 2025. It's now expected in the new... This has got shades of the Metropolitan Police's estate strategy being postponed. What was the reason for the delay, and when will we see the final published document?
I mean, I, like you, am eager to see it out there in the world. We've been working on it very eagerly, and we're very keen for it to be published. It's obviously not my place to comment on the reasons for delay, but I can say it's coming soon.
Who would be best placed to comment on the reasons for delay, so that we might write to them and ask them?
That would be the Minister.
Oh, the Minister. We can write to a Minister. We don't fear ministers here.
Specific Minister is...
Minister McCluskey. Martin McCluskey. Thank you.
Thank you. And when do we think it might? Because New Year is a large area. By the end of this month?
I'm afraid I can't comment on the timings.
That's fair enough. Are you in a position, without wishing, I'm sure that there are people, spoilers. Are you in a position to give us some of the, the key headlines which might be arising out of a result of the publication?
I can only speak to the chapter on heat networks, of course.
Yes.
What I will say is as I've alluded to your colleague, we will be setting out a trajectory of growth for heat networks and the conditions required to achieve that. And they're challenging, right? It's a challenging set of conditions to achieve the growth we need to see. But we set those out and consider our options there. And of course, the Warm Homes Plan will also set out how the government will... I think you'll know that the Warm Homes Plan was allocated a £15 billion spending, and it will also set out how that's going to be allocated.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Well, perhaps we might be putting pen to paper to the Minister about the delays, because we started this investigation and we thought that the Warm Homes Plan was going to be issued during the course of our three-meeting investigation, which is quite a lengthy investigation. We've still got site visits to do. Perhaps it might come out before we finish writing our report on our investigation. However, moving on to Assemblymember Andrew Boff, who's going to pick up some further questions with you.
First, I'd like to go to Ms Valadares. You talk about trying to encourage heat networks, communal heat networks, but they're in the energy assessment guidance of the GLA, paragraph 9.9. Ambient loop systems that are connected to individual pumps are specifically excluded from being part of heat networks. And this is quite different from the rest of the country. Could you explain why?
I'm afraid, unless my colleague Gabriella can speak to that, I'll have to take that question away and come back to you.
I very much hope you could come back to
Of course I will.
Because, and I'll give you the context. The context is that when developers look at the energy assessment guidance, they will specifically exclude those systems because it is so clear in that guidance. And those systems, the ambient loop systems, are a very efficient way of delivering heat to individual properties. And perhaps Ms Tollo could say whether or not you are aware of any such exclusions in any other part of the country.
I'm not aware of that. That doesn't mean that there aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were very forthcoming, may I say, in your replies to the point where I think my question 10 has been, 13 has been pretty much answered from what I've been following. Thank you very much for being so forthcoming. We didn't have to force any answers out of you on that. But what I will ask is, how many heat network zones do you expect in London, and over what time period you think those should be introduced?
Thank you. I'll take that one. So we've been working across the country to support a number of areas through the Advanced Zoning Programme, which really seeks to build momentum on development of large zone and scale networks ahead of the regulations coming into force, which we expect to be later this year. That programme is providing commercial, technical, advisory support to areas to develop reference schemes that will be the basis for building out networks in those zones, launch procurements for those schemes ahead of the regulations coming into force, so that once the regulations are enacted later this year, those areas will be able to move ahead and designate those zones and move into construction as quickly as possible, rather than having a lag after regulations coming into force before procurements can take place. So that programme is working with a number of areas in Greater London. 3 of those areas, the South Westminster Area Network, Old Oakham Park Rural Development Corporation Network and City of London Network, are in the first wave of AZP, which means that they have procurements, I think, in all cases now underway. So decisions on when those areas formally become zones will be a matter for the appropriate London Zone Coordination Body when that is set up, and I think we'll probably touch on the arrangements that we're working with London Government to put in place for that. But it will be possible for those zones to be designated quite soon after regulations come into force later this year. So those first 3 we would expect to be the first London zones. After that, there are really a number of ways in which zones could develop in London. I mentioned earlier the National Zoning Model. That identifies where there is potential for heat network zones, which, as you would expect, covers a large part of London. Within central London, potentially you could be looking at very large parts of the city being zoned. What I would expect then the London boroughs and London Government to consider is how to take that data and consider which zones would provide the best opportunities to bring forward for investment and in what sequencing. So you could potentially have some very, very large zones in London, perhaps to the extent that it wouldn't be feasible for a single developer, a single investor to take those on. So there'll be options around perhaps dividing some of those zones into smaller delivery areas and bringing those to the market. So I think we can sort of say we have a pretty clear view that, long term, we do think a significant amount, probably over 50% of heat demand in London, could be within zones in line with our 2050 targets. But the pathway between these first zones and that endpoint, I think there are various ways in which that could go, and that will be largely a matter for London local decisions on how to bring those zones to market. From a national perspective, we are committed to providing support to local government and local areas so that they don't face any new burdens as a consequence of taking on responsibilities around zoning. So we are already providing funding to London Government for the early stages of establishing zone coordination arrangements in London. We will be publishing a pipeline that explains, from a national point of view, which zones we expect to come to market in the near future. And obviously that will be done in discussion with areas in London as elsewhere. But again, I think there'll be some decisions there really around which areas have the greatest potential to develop zones at scale and with pace, and where is there the strongest local commitment and buy-in to those zones coming forward in the near future. And those will be part of the considerations for the pipeline that we'll set out after the regulations come into force.
Would you say it's probably easier to come forward with these zones in very built-up areas rather than in suburban areas?
Again, the model suggests actually, in broad terms, yes. And zoning is based on, again, evidence where heat networks should be the lowest cost, low carbon solution. That is typically in dense urban areas. You can have potentially zones which might be based around, there are heat networks that are being developed in new build developments outside dense urban areas. perhaps around campuses. So you could have, in theory, some quite small zones as well. But in general, what we're looking to support is those very large city-scale networks, exactly the sort of thing that people have seen in Scandinavia and elsewhere that we haven't yet seen in the UK. So we would expect where we're supporting development of zones, this is likely to be those dense urban environments where there is potential for zones to be built at real scale with all the opportunities that brings.
And would there be a general requirement by government that local authorities coming forward with such zones should at least consult the residents? I really should say that I should kind of declare an interest because I live on Barking Riverside, which is one of those advanced zones. It won't affect me personally, but I do live in the area. And there is some commentary there about how those residents feel like the choices have been taken away from them. Will there be a requirement to consult?
So there is a requirement for consultation as part of the stages to establishing a zone. So in terms of assume that you have a local area that wants to go ahead with developing and delivering a zone, our national model will map a potential zone, showing the boundaries of where, again, according to evidence of where the heat demand is, where a zone could be designated. But that data then needs to be taken by the local zone coordinator and refined. And that includes a consultation process.
It does.
So it does. So no zone can be designated without a consultation on the zone boundaries having taken place locally.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
I'm going to pass straight over to Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you very much. Natasha, we're just hearing there the role of local authorities. Can I ask what role do you expect the GLA to have in heat network zoning?
So the GLA, in its response to the zoning consultation, has asked to play a role with London government. So we're looking to work with boroughs and London councils to play that role regionally. And to help inform what the local application of the nationally determined kind of evidence-based zones could be. I think the role of the GLA is a strategic one, so it won't be in the direct delivery of the zones ourselves, but in supporting that join up across boroughs and making sure that the outcomes for Londoners as a whole across all those priority areas we spoke about earlier are achieved with the zones that are coming into play.
Thank you. And what do you see as the role of London councils there? Obviously, you can't speak for them, but do you see that as a similar responsibility?
I think very much driven by the same priorities around ensuring that there's good join up, that what comes into play works for all the local areas involved and works for the residents of those areas first and foremost.
Thank you. John, if I can come back to you. In terms of new zones, how will those be decided?
So again, the starting point is it needs to be locally driven. So when zoning regulations are enacted, DESNZ will initially play the role of the National Heat Network Zoning Authority. So a team within DESNZ will be coordinating implementation of the zoning regulations at national level. That will include a process of dialogue with local areas that want to move ahead and deliver zones. So we expect there to be a pipeline developed, which will be through a process of discussion with local areas. In practice, if areas want to deliver a zone beyond that initial wave, that will be initially, I think, a conversation with the departments. We will be looking for evidence again that there is local commitment to that there is data that shows that there is a zone there that can be developed in line with the model and at the pace and scale that would deliver benefits. And a part of that conversation will be around the resources needed for zone coordination. So we'll say more about the detail of this in the zoning government response when that comes out. But the principle there is we want to ensure that any local authorities that are setting up zone coordination bodies are resourced to do so. And there will be a conversation there around available resources from government to enable them to play that role.
I don't know if you've just answered this question, in which case say that's all I can give you, but how does ownership and financing impact these decisions? I don't know if that's a question for you or Ludo.
Do you mean in terms of the financing models of networks that will be delivered?
Exactly, in terms of how you choose the operator.
Yeah. So the principle there is that we think it is essential that when developers are appointed to zones, that is through an open competition. So we are obviously appointing developers here to build out zone networks in zones with that demand assurance for the long term. So in terms of procurement law, and also I think in principle, it's essential that there's been a competitive process to demonstrate that those developers are best placed to do so. That process will be managed by, in most cases, again, the local zone coordination body. So it's up to, again, really the local areas involved in running that competition to set their priorities for what they want those developers to commit to deliver. There will be a set of core social value outcomes that all developers developing zones will be required to meet, but there will obviously be local elements to that will be part of the local competition for local areas to really define their expectations and their priorities for developers in their areas. In terms of ownership and financing, the approach that we're expecting to take to zoning competitions is something called an authorisation and consent regime. What that really is again, it's a sort of it's a competition first and foremost. That will result in a consent to develop that zone. Within that, there are a number of potential ownership and financing options. It is possible that local authorities might wish to choose to bid and compete to develop the zone themselves. It's possible you could see joint venture arrangements. It's possible we'll see entirely private sector developers or existing energy companies bidding to develop those opportunities. So there's a range of ownership models that are possible, but the principle there is that there will need to be an open competition which any interested parties can bid into, potentially including a range of different ownership structures, and it will then be a local decision as to which developer is appointed following that competition.
So at our last committee meeting, we had a guest, Simon Woodward from B&D Energy, and he was highlighting concerns about the competing consent procedure.
Yeah.
Is it the case, well, you've just said that local authorities would have to bid. How much local control would the authority have then in terms of that bid?
So there's a question around if we do have local areas that wish to be directly involved in zoning delivery, how we avoid any real or perceived conflict of interest alongside the zone coordination body role. So there are some structures that we're considering for where you could have basically an appropriate degree of separation between local authorities' role in coordinating and managing and overseeing a zone and potential involvement in delivery. So we think that there are ways in which that can be managed, but there's a potential conflict of interest point that would need to be resolved. But fundamentally, we've heard the concerns that is it too difficult or impossible for local authorities to take on a direct role in zone delivery? We think it is entirely possible for them to do so. We have, through the consultation process, I think seen evidence that in most cases, local authorities who are wanting to be involved in developing networks have actually quite similar expectations in terms of investment return to private sector developers. Where that's not the case and where local authorities have a very strong social value element to wanting to be a developer, that would come out in part of the competition process and might expect that to be recognised. But and we also have seen some evidence, I think, that local authorities are simply constrained in terms of finances. That I think means it's perhaps unclear how many local authorities would have the resources needed to become the developer of zones at this scale. But we're very clear that there's no barrier in the system to local authorities putting themselves forward to be developers. We would need to, we've thought about and would find solutions to that challenge of how you have a local authority potentially bidding to both develop a zone and oversee it through zone coordination. We think that can be managed. But other than that, we think it is possible that where local authorities are confident, if they have the resources, if they want to be directly involved in development and have the financial backing to do so, that is an option under the system.
And finally, can I ask you about somewhere where I think this has gone very wrong? So that's for East London Energy on the Olympic Park. The two councillors, Danny Keeling and Nate Higgins, have expressed concern to me that they've had mountains of casework from residents who are basically saying this is low reliability and high costs. I've looked at the website this morning and unbelievably there's a pop-up telling me there's a temporary boiler. What changes do you expect to happen so that heat networks can move to being efficient, affordable sources of heat that they should be?
So this is, why we're introducing Ofgem as the regulator, as you mentioned earlier. Ofgem will be introducing guaranteed standards of performance for heat networks from next year, and I'll bring out the list of what they cover. But they'll set guaranteed standards of performance as part of their authorisation conditions to reduce service outages and to drive improvements in heat networks. So they'll be looking at reducing the frequency, length and impact of any outages. They'll be asking heat networks to provide adequate notice to consumers of any planned interruptions to their heating, to particularly think about those who might have additional needs or particularly vulnerable and how they communicate to them, as well as to have, just generally good standards on that communications more widely. And Ofgem as a regulator will be able to pursue legal enforcement if necessary. So they can mandate information provision So where they think that a heat network might not be complying with the conditions, they can request information is provided. And then after that, they could submit provisional or final orders as well to the heat network to make improvements. And if those improvements are not made, they can request corrective action, and they can also seek consumer redress as well through their legal powers. This, we expect, will mostly be used in the most extreme cases, and we'd hope most heat networks will seek to comply and find ways to do so.
And will this also include looking at high standing charges? Because obviously there's no incentive to reduce your usage because it doesn't actually reduce the bill if the standing charge is what's essentially hitting you.
So that, I guess, relates to pricing. And the first step for Ofgem is to collect data on pricing so that it could understand the lay of the land.
Okay, and you said this is going to happen next year?
So guaranteed standards of performance kick in from next year. In terms of pricing, the immediate steps are around billing transparency. So giving more information to consumers about even who their operator is, who do they call. They're not always clear in the bills about that, as well as what they're paying. They'll also immediately put in back billing requirements. So what Tom was referring to earlier, where some consumers get bills that are back billed for years, that will stop. We cannot stop it immediately in social housing and leasehold cases because of an interaction with housing legislation that we're exploring with the Ministry for Housing and Local Government, MHCLG. But in terms of Ofgem and pricing, they will start to collect data this year, and then they'll look to benchmark next year.
Thank you. Natasha, can I come to you finally? Because obviously, if you're living in the East London Olympic Park, some guaranteed standards might be coming in a year's time, probably isn't going to satisfy you particularly.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is where, as I was saying, going forward and as in general, the position from the GLA is that we're only pursuing and supporting heat networks that are going to deliver for consumers in a way that is reliable and is fairly priced. But it doesn't change the fact that there are people living, like you say, at the moment without the supply that they should have in place, particularly vulnerable people who will be disproportionately impacted by the loss of supply. It's absolutely a priority for us to continue to lobby for changes and improvements and push for more regulation and for that to be happening more quickly. But it is outside of our immediate control to be able to make those changes. So we are reliant on Ofgem and the regulations they'll bring in. I don't know if you had anything you'd want to add from an infrastructure perspective.
Not really. I suppose just one additional point is around the sort of combination of London government that we hope to see in the zoning coordination role. And I think it speaks to the need to oversee these networks in an effective way. And we do see a role for London councils, London boroughs and the GLA to partner together. That's specifically, I think, important to mention because the number of heat network opportunities across the Greater London area do span a number of boroughs. So we do see opportunities across 25 different boroughs and corporations. And that does involve sort of a variety of different heat network projects at different levels of maturity and potentially different experiences. So I think ensuring that sort of multi-borough partnership will be absolutely vital to ensuring that we can actually address some of the existing challenges and avoid or mitigate further challenges in the future.
Okay, just push back on the specific challenge of East London Park, though. We heard from the last panel that one of the problems here is people fearing that they're going to be trapped and not be able to change their provider, and this is exactly what's happened. This is a very specific example, and it doesn't even work. People have nowhere to go and their bills are higher. What is the GLA going to do specifically about the Olympic Park?
I mean, I can't answer specifically on that project. I think we can take that away and come back with further information. But I think, again, I think there's a role to be played in terms of sharing expertise and picking up on lessons learned or lived experiences of many of the key London residents who are experiencing current heat network projects or some of the aspects to do with pricing. So I think, unless you wanted to add anything on that front.
That's fine. If that's a commitment to write to the Chair with a plan for the Olympic Park, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, it is a concern for us, I mean, because of the problems that we've seen with other regulators, as you know, as I already mentioned, Ofwat. And I think the issues that have been brought up by people who've been watching these meetings, talking about extremely high bills, you know, £6,500 on your energy bills is very large, but also hearing about people who are suffering outages. So however much we might be wanting to see progress made on heat networks, the idea that 6,000 people could be attached to a network that then provides a really expensive heat to lots of people in Enfield or another borough, or is dodgy and goes down all the time. That's something that's why we're investigating this from both ends, because I don't think any of us would really want to promote heat networks in the context of extremely high bills for consumers or something that is completely unreliable. And we've got a number of examples of both high bills and unreliability amongst the legacy systems that currently exist in London. I'm going to now pass over to Assemblymember Mahfouz and Assemblymember Boff, who just want to bring in some additional points.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the zoning question, so identifying zoning in the future, but actually just going back to some of the conversations that we've had previously, some of the potential sources for the heat are coming through data centres, and obviously my part of the world, in West London, they are springing up left, right and centre like there's no tomorrow. So there are opportunities as part of the planning process with data centres, both in terms of, which I think at the moment we're sort of currently missing. How can we make sure that we're not missing those opportunities as data centres are going through the planning process, and that we are identifying, the opportunities that they bring for the future in terms of future heat networks?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take that first and then perhaps invite GLA colleagues to come in. So first of all, I think where there are data centres being developed in an area that becomes a zone, part of zoning is that it will identify and can require sources of surplus heat to supply heat into that network. So the first step there will be, again, identifying those heat sources, which could well include data centres. We'd expect that normally to be a process of commercial discussion between a developer and a heat source supplier to agree a deal to supply heat. But ultimately, there is a regulatory aspect to that, and it's possible that there could be an agreement required for that data source, that heat source owner to supply heat if commercial arrangements aren't agreed. So within zones, we part of, again, the ensuring that zones are making best use of surplus heat is an essential part of the policy, and that applies to data centres.
Sorry, if I could just pause you, John. So that is sort of retrospectively looking at after the data centre has already gone in. But if I was developing an energy from waste site within London, I would be expected to link the heat offtake into a network locally. Why are we not doing that with data centres?
Yeah, that's where I think I might pass on to GLA to talk about the coordination challenge there locally.
Yeah, I might come in there. I think it's a very pertinent question, and I think the GLA has already been quite active in this space. I think specifically most of our attention has gone to, first of all, understanding where data centres are cropping up. We recognise this is an area of the economy that is experiencing high growth. We're aware of some of the challenges involved with the emergence of data centres, specifically in West London. But I think some of our findings recently point to the fact that data centres are likely to continue growing across London, so that sort of west to east axis. Positively, the GLA undertook a London sort of heat study, really trying to understand both the location of heat consumers or demand for heat across the city, and comparing that to the sources that are currently available across London. And I think that was a particularly powerful piece of technical work that's allowed us to understand that there are 7 strategic heat network areas that we are looking to pursue and hopefully sort of ensure that these become zones in themselves once the zone coordination announcement is made. And I think as part of that, we've undertaken an analysis to understand of the heat sources that do exist. So typically looking at waste to energy recovery facilities, wastewater treatment centres, but also data centres. That last category, just how relevant it is for the deployment of heat networks. And I think what we've managed to undertake with the recent study is the clarification that close to 350,000 homes could be heated through the current data centres that do exist in London, whilst also taking note of the future data centres that are expected to come London's way. So again, part of our work is also focused at the data level, and we are trying to relay some of the information that we are aware of, specifically looking at National Grid's business plan that indicates close to 5 gigawatts of power and demand connections being associated with upcoming data centres, with some of the work that NESO, the National Energy System Operator, is undertaking to actually fulfill its RESP role, so really trying to understand the strategic energy planning that needs to be undertaken. So I think I'll probably conclude in saying the GLA is trying to link up the data, highlighting where the opportunities lie with data centres, with a lot of the energy system planning that needs to undertake, and lastly, trying also to maximise benefits where we can also avoid upgrades to the electricity sort of network, so as to sort of bring about efficient planning and delivery of infrastructure.
I mean, it's all very positive, and you've thrown out a massive number there in terms of the 350,000 homes that could be heated through current data centres. And my challenge back to all of you really is in terms of, are we creating a problem where we're going to have to then retrofit in the same way that we're talking about heat networks from pre-2014, having to retrofit that, whereas actually there is nothing really within the current planning rules that force data centres to consider this as part of their build, and they're effectively given a green light to simply build the data centres, dictate what they want to do in terms of Section 106, etc. And this is a really potentially fantastic source of heat to tick all the boxes we want to achieve, 350,000 homes that could have been potentially connected up to current data centres. Is there not a risk that we're going to miss the boat and then having to have retrofit costs in the future?
I'm not sure if you wanted to come in on the London plan.
I guess we're limited in what can be said about the developing new London plan until it's out for consultation. My understanding is that it's working in anticipation of things like the zoning regulations and thinking ahead to that and working in an outcomes-based way. It's certainly something that we across our teams are thinking really about a lot, is using waste heat, because it is just such a prime opportunity, like you say. It's an obvious way to make something great from something that's just a byproduct of other processes. So that's definitely something that we're feeding in, as in terms of our feedback will be about that, and agreed that it would be great to put that in the forefront of how we approach future data centre planning. But there are obviously wider considerations that I won't be privy to sitting outside of the planning team, so I wouldn't want to speak on their behalf. Does that?
No, I think that's fine, but I think, probably more for Desnes really in terms of sort of wider planning rules to make sure that councils are, and as well as obviously ourselves as the GLA, are empowered to be able to put the stuff at the forefront of what we're expecting back when people are applying for data centres left, right and centre.
Yeah, thank you. I think if I could just make a slightly related point, really, about strategic heat sources, of which data sources are one type. I can't really speak to the sort of the planning rule aspects of that, but from a zoning perspective, we are very aware of the challenge of how do you get heat from where it is generated, a surplus heat, to where it needs to be to heat homes or businesses. And we're aware again of I think questions around whether and how the zoning regulations will support that. We are in the detail of the zoning regulations looking at the concept of what I think we'll refer to as an alternative heat network model. That would mean that a connection to a strategic heat source, be it data centre or energy from waste, from outside a zone, could be sort of formally recognised as part of the development of that zone and able to supply heat into that zone. So there are lots of ways in which I think that challenge could be addressed through the implementation of zoning locally, but we're aware there's, as well as the data centre question specifically, of this wider challenge around how do we get heat to where it needs to be, and are trying to, again, deliver the detailed regulations in a way that supports that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the final point really is, I mean, if you look at the map of where we need these heat networks, I mean, it's basically virtually the whole of London, apart from those green areas where we've got massive parks. So wherever these data centres are being located, they're all in high-density areas in terms of what we're concerned from a London-wide perspective. So it feels like, you know, it's still a bit of a missed opportunity until we get this stuff locked in. So, but thank you.
Okay, we're falling very slightly behind now. Just to point out, we've got another 18 questions at this point. But I'm just going to briefly bring in Assemblymember Boff, who wants to ask something additional as well.
In answer to Assemblymember Polanski's question, Ms. Valderas, you would said that you were effectively doing what I've heard from other members of the GLA saying, which is, we love all these proposals, but we're waiting around to be told something. You know, we've got situations where we like the idea of abolishing leasehold, but we carry on building leasehold properties when we could not be building leasehold properties. Can you undertake to look at the existing planning applications that are going through with a mind to delivering on the higher standards as outlined by Mixtolo, especially with regard to transparency, because this is something you could be doing now in anticipation of those higher standards coming along?
I apologise. I'm not trying to be in any way opaque. I can't speak on behalf of planning colleagues, but I can certainly take that back to them, and I can provide an update back to committee from...
I mean, presumably you're in regular communication with planning and also housing as well, to make sure that they are fully informed of the direction we're going in, because, you know, somebody needs to talk to them because they're already building stuff that needs to be retrofitted. It's going on at the moment all over London. They're building stuff that we know has to be retrofitted in the future because they won't insist on those higher standards.
No, I understand. And I think that there are, as we spoke about earlier, lots of priorities that mean that in some cases things do need to press ahead without all of the things that we would like to see because of the shortage of social housing and other things that exist. So it's absolutely not that there's not close working relationships between housing and energy and infrastructure and planning. It's just that there are lots of considerations that are impacting each individual decision. So I can absolutely take away the feedback from this committee and share that with planning and have further conversations about it. I just don't want to falsely commit to things that I can't commit to.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to move straight on to Assemblymember Thomas Turrell.
Thank you, Chair. So these first set of questions are to Natasha and Gabriel. The GLA have funded a series of local energy area plans and mapped out potential strategic heat networks that cross borough boundaries. How realistic do you think these networks are, and how long do you think they're going to take to implement?
Yeah, I can sort of take that initial question. Absolutely. I mean, the GLA has been pioneering the energy systems catapult methodology of local area energy planning, and to date, the GLA has completed North, South, West, and East London sub-regional LAPs, and I think those are absolutely vital in identifying the fastest ways of decarbonising an area based on the constraints and opportunities, whilst also recognising changing energy user needs. I think the conclusions that we can draw from the LAP process is that heat networks do represent a significant opportunity for London to decarbonise its heat. So I think at the sort of technical evidence base, we've seen LAPs confirm that. What we also recognise is that the heat networks have been identified through the LAP process, span a number of different boroughs, and those projects again include proposals that are at different stages of maturity. So it is very difficult to bring an assessment on how long it will take to bring those infrastructure projects forward. It goes without saying that, of course, heat network projects are very large kits the infrastructure assets themselves are quite complex, and so they do take time in terms of planning and delivery. But again, that's why the GLA's attention has been devoted to ensuring that there's been careful planning. We understand which heat networks to pursue first in terms of maximizing both the efficiencies and the benefits, and linking into a lot of the sources of waste heat and the offtake that we can latch onto. So unfortunately, it is very difficult to put a date or a figure on that question. I'm not sure if you wanted to complement here.
No, I think
Yep.
we've covered it.
Fair enough. So the committee heard a suggestion from Anthony Meanwell from E.ON in December that London needs an infrastructure for London to provide the strategic heat infrastructure to move heat across the city. What thought has been given to how to build, pay for and manage this pan-London network?
Yes, I'm aware of that suggestion, and I think it's arisen in part from some of the work that the GLA has been undertaking. I think I previously mentioned this, but the London Infrastructure Framework, which is identifying priorities across London in terms of infrastructure investment. Heat networks are expected to be one of the flagship investments that will emerge from that final report. And what we are seeing is a possibility that the London Infrastructure Framework will be accompanied by a series of strategic recommendations to help complement and move forward the implementation of the London Infrastructure Framework pipeline. One of those recommendations may be something in the space of, or sort of similar to what you've stated, which is the need for an infrastructure promoter, an infrastructure authority, regardless of the terminology, perhaps an entity or a function that could be provided to ensure that many of these projects can be moved along from the sort of the concept stage through planning and feasibility to commercialization and delivery. I think what can be confirmed is there is a need for that to happen, and I think existing accelerators and sort of the mechanisms that the GLA, London councils and London boroughs have been providing to heat network developers have been absolutely vital and essential for those that have come forward, alongside much of the help that DESNZ itself has been providing. But I think it's likely too early a stage to sort of take a view on that. I think it's probably best to wait for the arrival of the zone coordination announcement and some of the granular detail within that.
Thank you. And then, as well as networks to transmit heat, how is heat storage being integrated into London's heat network plans?
I mean, potentially, I'd also invite DESNZ's colleagues here to complement. But I'd say I think there's two things to flag. Obviously, the nature of the benefits, the nature of heat networks themselves is such that economies of scale and efficiencies can be maximized when undertaking heat networks at scale. So that's really why we are promoting or would like to see district heating come forward based on fifth generation modern efficient heat networks that are available out there as proven technologies. One of the ways to secure and enhance those efficiencies is to ensure that there is a role for thermal storage, to ensure that we can sort of top up or deal with situations whereby there are peaks and troughs with the supply of heat. Any energy system is very familiar with the fact that there isn't always a constant supply of energy, and so there's definitely a role to play in ensuring that there is a storage capability and a facility to do that. Some of the existing heat networks, including in London, already have some thermal storage sort of capabilities, and I think the committee may be aware of some of those. It is important also because it adds to the resilience of the wider energy system, and that's definitely something that the Greater London Authority would like to promote and see in the Greater London area. And the second point is really around, this obviously also links to the role of transmission networks, so ensuring that different district heating networks across various postcode areas are linked up by a larger transmission network that can help move heat from areas where we have lots of surplus heat or waste heat to the specific networks that are either currently present or will be coming forward.
Thank you. I'm going to be moving us into the protecting customers section now, but just for the benefit of other committee members, I'm going to ask these questions out of sequence so that I can stick with Gabriel and Natasha for now. And that is that given the large number of homes on heat networks are social housing, how can you ensure that these groups are not adversely affected by being on a heat network?
So I guess there's two parts to that in terms of when we look at connections going forward under zoning regulations, there's opportunity for exemptions where they're required, and that's something that London Government will look at as and when needed to make sure that there's no disproportionate impact on any particular group, particularly marginalised groups that we might see amongst the cohort in social housing. And in terms of the existing networks, because I appreciate that that's a key focus for committee as well, again, it's about doing all that we can as a strategic authority to lobby and to work with partners that have got the ability to make changes to support those consumers that are already within networks that maybe are not working as well as they should be for them. But as I said earlier, there is a limit to our powers as the GLA in terms of what we can do to intervene in networks that are operating poorly at the moment. What we can do is make sure that it's very clear what our expectations are as a strategic authority for any heat networks that we would be supporting, and that we're very clear that our expectations are of providers, and work in all the ways we can with the powers that we do have to make a difference there.
So, thank you for that. So moving on to John and Ludo now. How will you work together with Ofgem to ensure that Londoners pay a fair price to heat in a heat network zone?
So, obviously, there's the Ofgem fair pricing benchmarks and the pricing benchmarks that we've mentioned before. Within zoning, as heat network developers bid to develop out a zone, zoning coordination bodies will be able to see what their sort of pricing schemes are, and they will be able to refute a zone or progress in a zone if they think the price is not fair.
Thank you for that. And do you have any plans to implement a price cap for heat networks?
No.
So, nice, brief answer. So what are the key factors that will influence the future price that the consumers will pay for heat from heat networks?
I think we could write a PhD thesis on that. Obviously, we've mentioned the efficiency of heat networks. That has a huge impact on pricing. That's why we've got the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme that supports heat networks in becoming more efficient. For future heat networks, I think it's the ability for them to tap into local heat sources, surplus sources of heat that would otherwise go unutilised. And we do think our zoning framework will enable local authorities to support zone developers in making the most of those opportunities to tap into cheaper heat.
Thank you. What needs to happen for consumers on heat networks to see lower bills, and how likely is anything going to happen soon to lower bills for consumers?
I don't know that things can happen quickly because bills are tied to a whole range of factors. The aforementioned efficiency. Sometimes you need to plan upgrades to actually identify how to optimise a heat network. I will say though, and John might be able to add, our experience of the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme, where we've sort of supported the upgrade of heat networks. Sometimes some simple optimisation goes a long way, and we do hope as the sector grows and it becomes more mature, that operators will be able to identify those opportunities for quick fixes where they haven't already.
Thank you. And my final question will be, please, Chair, is in a functioning market competition between providers should push up the standards and lower prices. What will push up standards and lower prices within a heat network?
This is the role of regulation, right? The government will be consulting on the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme. That's already been mentioned. The consultation is generally open. We want to strike the right balance between genuine improvements that will bring the cost of heat networks down for consumers without landing a fee on a leaseholder that is just unreasonable, or affect the number of social housing that are built, the social housing build out. So we do really need to strike a balance, and this consultation will be really important for us to gather evidence from a range of stakeholders, housing developers, social housing providers, housing associations, and heat network developers themselves, to tell us where it might be going too far in trying to achieve the most efficient heat networks, and what we can do to implement something proportionate that does protect consumers, that does lead to improvements in their networks without landing them a huge bill because of it. What can we do to enable that? And some of that might be about how you distribute the costs over time, because some of these improvements will lead to significant, reductions to the cost of costs of running that heat network. And from a sort of purely economic model term, if you sort of ran that over 20 years, you'd say, yeah, that's a great investment. But where's that upfront money coming from? And those are some of the questions we're going to have to explore with stakeholders as we consult on our technical standards.
Thank you very much. So sticking with protecting customers, I'm going to just go back to the revenue aspect of it, in terms of, we've heard obviously this morning, we've heard from previous sessions and from other stakeholders that the fundamental issue with a lot of the heat networks is that the cost is higher than the counterfactual in terms of gas alternative. What are we going to do to ensure that that isn't the case going forward? How can we have more parity between those costs?
So the government has committed to explore how to make low carbon heat more cost competitive, because it is essential for the trajectory. We have to take a step back and look at the entire cost model of a heat network, and there'll be different interventions based on that. So in what ways can government support cheaper financing? And actually, zoning policy is one way to think about that. We're trying to introduce more certainty, and by introducing more certainty into where heat networks might be, you might change the risk profile for a bank investing in that heat network. But you also look at surplus heat, as we said. That could be a way to drive cost improvements. Encouraging thermal energy storage or innovations in that space could also lead to cost reduction. So we really have to take a very considered approach that looks across the full cost profile of a network, and what levers can we have as government to affect that.
And just before we go, I mean, you've identified there that really a lot of the upfront costs, so the capital costs, are really then passed on to the consumer in terms of the ongoing revenue charges. But before we move on to that, one of the challenges is that we've raised earlier and heard earlier was around transparency of the charging. Now, obviously, for a lot of people we've heard they're in social housing, the costs are consumed within their service charges, which don't necessarily have transparency. How can we make sure that there is greater transparency over what the cost is, so that it can be challenged where appropriate?
Yeah, this is a problem we're well aware of, and so is Ofgem. We are going to be working with MHCLG to explore our options in this space, because it's not as straightforward as perhaps another domestic consumer. We are going to be pushing for billing transparency, but it's harder to, let's say, unbundle those costs in the context of social housing, and legislation might need to change. We could write in with more details, if you'd like, about some of the options there. I would say that for any vulnerable consumers, the protections that will come in under Ofgem's regime include making sure they're on priority service registers, making sure there's reasonable adjustments in place for them to access the information they need or to understand their needs, and also making sure there's debt recovery pathways in place that are, let's say, kinder than some consumers might be experiencing at the moment. And so that's an important step that's going to be taken.
Thank you. And yeah, we definitely would appreciate that additional information. Just going back to the capital costs, and I've been out in Pimlico, where obviously we're talking to residents there, as a number of my colleagues have, and they obviously have a heat network undertaking that leaseholders are potentially going to have costs of upgrading the existing heat network that are far higher than installing individual heat pumps, which receive government subsidies. They state that government should seek to ensure cost parity if it's promoting heat networks as a requirement. Do you have plans to ensure that this will be the case? So, we've got on one hand, if I install a heat pump, obviously isn't necessarily going to be available to me if I live in a flat, for example. But if I'm connecting up to this heat network, I'm going to be expected to pay quite a far more significant sum.
So within zoning, we are expecting to introduce a connection cost cap. I won't go into the details of it now because it's in the upcoming publication of our government response, but which should address some of the concerns there for heat networks within the zone.
So I think just to add to that as well, I appreciate there's a distinction here between the issues faced on existing networks, those that we are now supporting through funding or through zoning. Within the Green Heat Network Fund, which is the major capital scheme to support the construction of new networks we have at the moment, there's a provision there which means that any residential customers must pay a cost no higher than a low-carbon counterfactual, which means in practice that any networks we are supporting through that scheme, customers could not be charged more than a heat pump equivalent.
So that applies to new residents, but not to residents who are currently on a heat network that needs significant upgrading. So they're currently dealing with an ineffective or inefficient heat network. So they're paying more for that at the moment. Then they're having to pay a significant capital sum potentially, specifically if they are a leaseholder, in order to replace it with something that's better, and they are not protected or supported through a subsidy at the moment.
Yeah, so the other capital scheme we have at the moment is the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. So that exists to fund the costs of improvements to existing networks. It's a combination of grant funding for optimisation studies to identify what needs to be done to improve the operation of those networks, and then capital funding to fund those improvements. Now, I'm not familiar with the detail of the scheme you mentioned and whether that funding would be appropriate in that case, but it's a really important, significant scheme. And where we have examples of networks now that are facing high costs, that could well be due to in some cases, relatively low-cost improvements that can be made with the right technical advice. That scheme is there now. We've seen really strong demand for it. We're really keen as well for any examples of networks that are experiencing those issues to consider applying for that scheme, because that funding is there and plays a really important role in delivering those upgrades right now.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like there's potentially a gap there, particularly for. I mean, we've heard there is a massive discrepancy between the different types of heat networks. They're not all the same. Obviously, different ages, different quality of standards, etc. But we did hear from Stephen Knight from the Heat Trust previously around this being akin to the remediation of cladding on properties in terms of some of the costs to leaseholders. They're having to deal with the problem as it is now, and they're having to deal with a bigger problem to even just replace it. How do we make sure that we don't leave people in that sort of situation?
And this is where the consultation on the Heat Network Technical Assurance Scheme is really important for us to get that feedback about how it could be designed to ensure we avoid those outcomes and we learn those lessons from that scheme.
Thank you.
I just see did you want to come in on this section? Okay, you're fine. And Assemblymember Prince, I had you down as potentially wanting to add something here as well.
Yes.
But you will use your micro. You're going to use your microphone.
I'm going to forego that potential.
Okay.
If I
in
needed
which
a
case, we're going to move on to the issue of decarbonising heat networks, which I think we started at the top with low cost, low carbon, and obviously the lower the costs, where we're removing existing legacy systems, then obviously that's particularly to be welcomed. How do you decide whether to prioritise support for decarbonisation of existing heat networks or to prioritise the expansion of new heat networks? And I'll start with DESNZ and then see if you want to come in from the GLA side.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that the simple answer is it is both in parallel, and I think that's essential. I think you see that both in terms of the regulations we're bringing forward, where we have, zoning is explicitly designed to grow new low-carbon networks, and the wider consumer protections are essential, both protection of customers on those new networks and to drive up standards for existing customers. So we've always thought it's absolutely critical to have the market growth regulations alongside the consumer protection regulations to give that confidence both for new and existing customers, and those things need to happen in parallel. From a funding point of view...
So there's no secret DESNZ document that says that one has higher priority than the other that we need to know about?
Not that I've seen.
Not that you've seen.
And we have a...
There is one.
And from the funding point of view, we have the Green Heat Network Fund and Heat Network Efficiency Scheme really are complementary schemes. And the GHNF is, again, funding... Can actually fund the refurbishment of existing networks as well. It is primarily so far has covered the construction of new low-carbon heat networks. But if again existing networks are looking to decarbonise and change heat sources, that would probably be a GHNF funding route for them. The Heat Network Efficiency Scheme is around, it has decarbonisation benefits, but it is in terms of improved efficiency, but its focus is primarily improving the operation networks with a strong focus on customer detriment. And those two schemes, they're obviously, will be, again, the Warm Homes Plan will say a bit more about future funding for those schemes, but they both play a really important complementary role.
Any thoughts from the GLA side about prioritising the situation with existing networks, some of which we know are very expensive and actually now pretty high carbon because they might be gas-derived, CHP, all those sorts of things, versus the expansion of new heat networks, which might help you achieve the targets that we were talking about right at the top of the meeting?
So we're supporting both the development and expansion of heat networks, but also the decarbonisation of existing ones through the funding programmes that we have available. What I would say is, in terms of the kind of illustrative figure around new connections, the only way in which that matters is in the journey towards decarbonisation. So it doesn't matter so much that new connections are achieved as compared to decarbonising existing heat network connections. What we're concerned with is a transition towards low carbon solutions that is fair for Londoners and supports them to live healthy, warm, low cost lives. So yeah, very much supportive of decarbonising existing networks as much as developing new ones.
Okay, so going for the parallel approach. I just mentioned gas as not being particularly low carbon. And I said, is there a hierarchy? And you said, not that you're aware of. Is there a hierarchy within DESNZ, and I'll come to the GLA again on this, in terms of what is the most cost-effective source of low-carbon heat? I mean, do we prefer it from energy from waste plants or data centres or any of the other facilities that we've touched on today? Or are you sort of, level playing field on all sources of low-carbon heat?
I would say we're quite technology agnostic. When we're looking at setting carbon emission limits within zones, we're doing that on a grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour basis, and then it's up to the heat network to decide how to meet that limit. And it's entirely location specific. If they happen to have a data centre there that they've managed to link into, brilliant. If they're close to the Thames and they have a water source heat pump, absolutely fine, as long as they meet the emissions limit.
Okay, so you're agnostic around the source of the low carbon heat. If I had to ask you to balance the cost against the carbon impact, where are you going on that? I mean, would you be looking for the cheapest options, or would you be looking at the lowest carbon options?
So the way we're setting this out in zoning, where we are setting carbon limits, but they will be from 2030. So there's an expectation that zones will have time to plan, but also to reflect on how they can make that mix work, to be competitive, to sign on the heat, to start supplying the heat, whilst meeting these carbon emission limits. And in the consultation on zoning, we did say as well that there could be a ratcheting then, sort of an acknowledgement that actually as you're decarbonising heat networks or you have low carbon heat networks, they're mostly going to be on electricity. And if they're drawing from a low carbon grid, then actually we should start to get more ambitious over time about the emissions from heat networks and reducing those. So
it might be a low carbon grid, but if you're currently just pulling in terms of electricity, you're definitely going to have higher bills than someone who's using gas. There's no doubt about that. Electricity is definitely still more expensive than gas. So, okay.
Just perhaps add to that from a funding point of view as well. Most of the zones we expect to see developed will be receiving funding in some way from the government, probably through the Green Heat Network Fund. That is playing a really important role in the development of most new large-scale networks. Within the GHNF, again, there is a carbon threshold, so all projects do need to be low carbon. Again, there can be a range of heat sources used to deliver that, but as part of the assessment process for that funding, we absolutely do look at value for money alongside that. So although I would say we are, yes, within that application process, I think probably it's true to say broadly agnostic on the heat source, but it's always looked at alongside the cost effectiveness and value for money of each proposal.
Thank you. Natasha or Gabriele, are you in agreement with that position, sort of agnostic between different forms of low carbon heat, and where are you in terms of the cost versus carbon output of a particular source of heat?
So I think we're just focused on what is the most appropriate low carbon source for the particular area. There are kind of geographic implications for certain things. It can be challenging to transmit waste heat, but not prohibitive. I think there are particular benefits where waste heat is already being generated to make the use of it. In terms of cost, I might be misunderstanding the question, but I think what we are looking at is generally an assumption that there is this move towards low carbon solutions. So we're looking at what is the most cost effective low carbon solution for the consumer in any given scenario. We can't compare with gas over the long term because the expectation is gas will be eventually phased out altogether. But I think there is definitely work to be done to continue to look at improving the cost gap between electricity and gas.
So let's say I'm developing a property that's right next door to the data centre emporium that is being developed in Assemblymember Mahfouz's constituency of Ealing, but I have identified an alternative low-carbon heating solution that I feel is more cost-effective than linking onto the data centre and being part of the heat network. So would new buildings that are being constructed in a particular zone area, would they be allowed to choose to install a different kind of low carbon? I mean, let's say I'm going to put air source heat pumps all over the entire building for every flat individually, rather than connecting to a new heat network. Is that something that it would be permissible?
So I will let other panel members correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that in terms of the new zoning regulations, subject to the detail of publication, that they are focused on the areas where heat networks are the lowest cost, low carbon option. So it wouldn't be the case that the building owner would be identifying an alternative, lower cost, low carbon option, is my understanding, but I will tag you in.
Yeah, I mean, I think briefly the answer is that in most, where there is a zone, the evidence is that for most buildings of certain types, a heat network connection would be the lowest cost, low carbon option for that type of property. We will be looking at cases where that may not be the case, and looking at some exemptions where there is evidence that it would just not make sense to connect to the network. I think the detail of that will be in the zoning government response, but that's the basic principle.
So what you're saying is in the heat network zones, a heat network will be the most cost-effective, low-carbon solution for heating.
So the zone will be based on evidence that for buildings of a certain type, it would typically and in most cases be the lowest cost, low-carbon heat source. We will allow for the fact that there may be specific circumstances around the building where that may not be the case, and look at where there might be appropriate exemptions in some cases.
Okay. So what have we learned? Because we've got these advanced zoning pilots in London at the moment. And what have we learned from the current heat network zoning pilots that have been set up? I don't know whether... Shall we start with Desnes?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you.
John has put his light on, so
Yeah.
let's go.
Yeah. So the advanced zoning programme is, it is explicitly about learning by doing, really, in how to build networks of this scale for the first time, really, in the UK. So we have learned a lot from the development of those projects in terms of the technical aspects, how to develop reference schemes, as we call them, for the initial stage of development in what are often very complex urban environments. I'd probably pick out the South Westminster area network as one that's just particularly interesting in terms of some of the challenges around decarbonising in an area of the city where you've got all the usual challenges of a dense urban environment, as well as lots of heritage buildings and so on. So there's a sort of technical design aspect which we are learning a lot about. There is also a procurement and commercial aspect to that as well. So we have, through the AZP, been intentionally using a range of different procurement approaches and different commercial approaches. That has helped us inform the position we've set out previously on the consent approach to a competition we'll be taking when zoning rolls out in full. At a more detailed level, we've learnt a lot from, again, supporting those areas in their procurements. Things like how do you have standardised procurement documentation that makes it easier for developers to respond. We're really keen, again, when we see more procurements happening at scale, that we can have as far as it makes sense to do so, a standard approach that is both easy for local authorities to pick up and implement for their competitions and easy and consistent for developers to respond to. So developing those kind of commercial and procurement terms has been a big part of learning from that process.
So lots of good learning.
I think so, yeah. And on top of that, from a project level, all the challenges you would expect around whether it's planning, permitting, engineering, construction challenges at an individual level, which we're also committed to making that learning available to other areas looking to do this.
Any specific major challenge that jumps out at you? Obviously, the government has been talking a lot about the need to get rid of all these hurdles in the planning system. Is it planning? Is it technical? Is it any specific, very large, major challenge that has...
Yeah, I'm not sure there's any one single challenge that stands out. I think it is that range of things. I think in the London context in particular, these coordination challenges around infrastructure are probably the thing that is not unique, but perhaps particularly acute. And I think beyond the scope of the pilots themselves, when you look at probably the stage that we haven't got to yet, but we know is coming and need to plan for, when we do see these networks built out at scale, we know that will involve a degree of disruption. Inevitably, there will be pipe work going in. And I think the challenges that we're sort of looking ahead to are around how do you coordinate that development with other infrastructure work in a complex, dense urban environment like London.
Yes, I think that's why when we heard from E.ON, the concept of planning for London, Transport for London, Energy for London should be joined by Infrastructure for London to get that sort of pan-London approach to make sure that we don't end up with the nonsense that we currently have where a road is dug up by Thames Water and 3 weeks later it's dug up by UK Power Networks. And it would be quite nice to try and not see the installation of heat networks joining some sort of unholy triumvirate, and the road, or a very large area potentially, is dug up every 3 weeks, whether we like it or not. I'm sure most Londoners would endorse that comment. Now, in December's committee meeting, we also heard from Hemico, who said that they'd identified opportunities with TfL. I'm going to come to Natasha and Gabriele on this one, such as locating heat generation and thermal storage within TfL sites. But Hemico did tell us that this is something that they have been struggling at the moment to push through. Is there some kind of coordination of this going on? We heard a lot about the heat offtake from Bunhill, but that doesn't really seem to have been replicated anywhere else. What is going on with TfL, who, as far as I can figure out, are one of probably the largest user of electricity in London and certainly generate an awful lot of heat in many of the tube lines. So where's it all going and what are we doing about it? Do you want to go for that, Gabriele?
Yeah, I can maybe pick up some strands to that question. So And I should note, I can't speak on behalf of Transport for London, but I'm aware that there are teams and some work that's been happening to explore opportunities to make use of TfL land more broadly to enable some of the decarbonisation efforts and some of the targets that we have in place. That also does include some of the work that you've mentioned and some of the possibilities with heat networks. As a parallel example, I think entities such as Places for London are also exploring using some of that land, for example, for battery storage. And I think the GLA in particular would definitely promote the use of land that is available and in our ownership and control to support some of the mayoral targets out there. I think it's a largely common sense approach. I think some of the challenges that we have is around, and going back to some of the benefits that we'd like to unlock, is around understanding where those opportunities are. So ensuring that we have the data and the evidence base in place to ensure that where land is available, we are making best use of it and prioritizing it and linking it to local opportunities for district heat networks. The flip side as well is, and perhaps going back a touch, but Transport for London are of course a key stakeholder as well, not just in the provision of some waste heat in some bits of its sort of asset base. They actually hold the potential to provide some off-take heat, which is a very exciting prospect, but they also are a key stakeholder in terms of ensuring that the delivery, as you were just saying, of new infrastructure, specifically heat networks assets, do not come at the expense of road network disruption or disruption to businesses and residents. And I know that there are significant efforts on the way involving the infrastructure coordination service function that the GLA carries out in partnership with Transport for London and boroughs, or if you like, highway authorities, to ensure that we are sort of maximising opportunities for coordination with other regulated utilities. And as you indicated, where sort of future investments do need to be made across gas, water and power, sort of asset bases, that we are doing that simultaneously at the same time in the same areas as heat networks, so as to reduce disruption. So really trying to promote collaborative delivery where possible.
Well, yes, I heard the Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander, talking about the introduction of lane rental charges, and councils outside of London talking about that to sort of try and enhance the chances of people who need to dig up the road doing it either more quickly or working together so that it doesn't have to be dug up more than once. Do we actually have plans to? I mean, we have already admitted, I think, that some of the costs are quite high that might end up being passed on to heat network consumers, either where existing networks are being redone or new networks are being brought in. So is the GLA in a position to reduce lane rental costs for roadworks when pipes are being installed, or you're just going to make people work more effectively together?
I think it's, in a nutshell, it's likely to be a combination of both. So we already have a lane rental scheme that is very effective in London, and it's been in place for a number of years, and that's operated by Transport for London. That's the Transport for London lane rental scheme. And the statistics point to the benefits of having lane rental in place, so as to reduce disruption, avoid unnecessary works, but also where works do need to happen. Construction and delivery with infrastructure is part and parcel of doing these sort of large-scale projects, that we are promoting fast and efficient works programs. And so work is underway to sort of fulfill one of the mayoral commitments to reduce disruption. And so we are supporting boroughs to bring forward lane rental schemes across London. We have taken a phased approach on this front, and the first few lane rental schemes that were proposed have been accepted by the Secretary of State and the DfT, and so I think that's sort of work in progress, and we expect that the large majority of London will be covered by a lane rental scheme over the next couple of years. The caveat to that is, of course, lane rental in itself can, at times, we recognise, represent an additional charge or cost to the delivery of infrastructure. However, we do promote waivers and 100% exemptions where collaborative delivery is being pursued. So again, one of the functions that the Infrastructure Coordination Service and the GLA is undertaking is supporting the planning of the asset management and capital delivery teams across utilities to work together to understand where there are spatial overlaps and opportunities to bring forward collaborative delivery. And simultaneously, we are starting conversations with heat network developers to sort of look at their medium to long-term plans so as to be able to coordinate those works going forward. So we would expect that lane rental schemes, if they were to be in place in those locations, that they carry exemptions or some sort of waiver to relieve those costs.
Okay, well, that sounds refreshingly flexible and taking an approach that will hopefully pay off in terms of getting this work done as quickly and effectively as possible, but also without creating a huge cost to pass on in certain cases. I'm going to pass over to Assemblymember Roberts, and then we're going to wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Desnes. I think you mentioned there was a £15 billion worth of budget was heading our way for the whole project. Was I correct in hearing that number?
That's the Warm Homes Plan allocation.
Warm Homes Plan,
yeah.
15 billion. And does that include the costs for heat network, the expansion of heat networks in London?
So within that, that will include funding for future years for the Green Heat Network Fund, which has already funded, I think it's about 180 million of projects so far in London, and that will be for funding up to 29-30 for the Green Heat Network Fund and the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme as part of that total.
Excellent. That's the answer to that question, Chair. Thank you. One further supplementary one to the GLA. It's something that we touched on lightly earlier, and it's what support to boroughs is available from the GLA, such as through the Zero Carbon Accelerator, to support knowledge and ensure a coordinated approach across London.
So yes, the Zero Carbon Accelerator is probably the main programme at the moment that's providing that support, and it follows a number of other accelerator programmes that existed previously. At the moment, I can tell you exactly what's going on with it.
Yeah, excellent. Real-time updates.
Yeah, so there's total spend of just over 1.7 million on 15 proposed heat networks at the moment. And that's a combination of grant to public sector bodies, including local authorities, but also including NHS trusts and other bodies like that, to support them in their work ahead of the capital delivery. So it's kind of the feasibility studies, it's supporting them with their wider kind of project development, getting them up to the point of being able to deliver or establishing what's possible to deliver. And alongside the grant funding, there is support through Mott MacDonald and our alliance members to provide that kind of expertise and capacity that the boroughs might not have themselves in-house at the moment, to be able to get that work over the line. And we've had lots of really positive feedback as well from people who've used the scheme, boroughs especially saying they wouldn't have been able to get things where they'd gotten them to without the Zero Carbon Accelerator.
Excellent. And those 15 schemes you mentioned, is that public domain stuff or is it confidential?
I don't think it's secret.
Yep.
I can check what's public domain and provide a full update.
That will be helpful, and I think it would also, because sometimes these committee meetings can be terribly sort of, gotcha moments. It would also be helpful, I think, for the committee's deliberations to be able to find out where boroughs have found it useful.
Absolutely.
And if you've got, testimonials that you'd like to share, then we'd be willing to hear from them.
Of course, absolutely, I can share that. I'm sure much of it is already public domain, but I'll pull together everything else that might be useful as well and share that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
And finally, what's next then for GLA policy in this area, and when do you expect to engage in further consultation with Londoners around the role of heat networks in the forthcoming new London plan, or the updated London plan, depending on how you view it? So,
my mic's still on, so that's easy. Sorry, I've been bad at tagging it on and off. So we're waiting for the Warm Homes Plan and the zoning regulations to further develop our policy. We're working in the meantime with the rest of London Government to look at what models might work well for the local zoning coordinator function. We continue to do our work that's already in place through the Zero Carbon Accelerator and other projects that we have to support decarbonisation through heat networks and otherwise. The London Plan, there's a lot to be worked through following the National Planning Policy Framework draft, which I think the committee will be aware of. So the planning team working through all of that and getting through the next steps to consultation. I can't comment on much detail around that, but that's forthcoming.
Okay, well, I'm asking you to look into the future a bit there. So thank you for going as far as you could. And also thank you to our guests, not just from the GLA, but also from DESNZ. Sorry to push you on the Warm Homes Plan and when it might be arriving, but you couldn't really have expected anything else, I think. We've now reached the end of the session today, and I'd like to thank you all for attending and for answering our questions. The committee actually has a few items of any other business to deal with. It really won't take very long if I just ask you just to stay put just for a second. Could I ask the committee to note the report that we received and the discussion that we've just held? And can I also ask for delegated authority to be delegated to me as the chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree any output arising from this discussion and the previous parts of our investigation? Thank you. Could I ask the committee to note our work programme for the 25-26 year, which is very nearly at an end? The date of the next meeting is the 3rd of February in the chamber here. However, the first part of the meeting is going to start from 9:30 a.m. in the London living room, where we are hosting an informal event with Londoners. So the time when we might arrive here for the more formal part will be possibly subject to a bit of change depending on how that progresses earlier. So it won't just be a morning session. We may finish at 1:30, possibly 2. So just to adjust your diaries a bit. The last item on the agenda is any other urgent items of business. I have no urgent business. I declare this meeting closed.